Grafton Planning Board meeting. It is 7:02 p.m. And pursuant to the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting of the Grafton Planning Board is being conducted with both in-person and remote participation by board members and members of the public. Remote participation by the public for the public comment agenda item, the public hearings, and any other matter for which the board allows public participation will be via the Zoom raised hand feature. If you raise your hand on Zoom, you'll be enabled at an appropriate point to enter the meeting via voice or video to make a comment or ask a question. In all cases, whether in person or remote, please identify yourself by name and address for the record. Every vote will be taken by roll call. Please note that this meeting is being recorded as well as being broadcast live on the Grafton Community Television Government Channel. And I'll begin with a roll call of those of us here. Mr. Robbins?
Present.
Mr. Hassinger?
I'm here.
Ms. Hassinger?
Here.
Mr. Venkatraman?
Present.
And I am here. We are absent our associate member, Maura McCormack, and staff on the call is Ms. Coughlin.
Here.
And Ms. Tapper.
I'm here.
And Natalia Alward.
Present.
All right. And we'll get to you, Bob, in the room when that comes up. But all right. So our first agenda item, as always, is public input. If anyone has anything to bring to the board's attention or mention that is not otherwise on the agenda, now would be the time to do so.
It's on the agenda.
All right, I'm not seeing anyone for that, so that brings us to our first action item. Might wanted to take these both together as far as the board is concerned, but it's approval under subdivision control not required plan A&R 2023-04 for 61 Weston Street, Willard House Clock Museum, and there's also a A&R for 2023-05 62 Weston Street, also Willard House Clock Museum. Fiona, did you want to introduce this since I saw your memo as well?
Yes, absolutely. So this was a submission presented by Land Planning. They submitted their application for both of these A&Rs on March 2nd, 2023. I did provide some comments about these A&Rs in order to kind of make them more presentable for the board and kind of streamline the review process, which I outlined in my memo. A lot of it is just kind of minor administrative things, and the applicant should be here. I believe he is he should be joining to present and to talk through the memo as well as any questions that the board may have on in regards to both of these applications. Natalia, did you see Mr. Hill?
I sent him the link. He requested it later this afternoon,
Okay.
mid-afternoon.
I don't see Norman Hill on the call unless it's his cell phone number.
Okay. Well, I can, Justin, I can share my screen or whatever is easiest for the board to talk through the materials in light of his absence.
I'm okay with you sharing the screen.
Or Dave, whoever.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead and share your screen.
Sure. Absolutely. Just give me 1 second here. Apologies. Just getting myself squared away. So we'll start with the application for 61. Trying. Okay, so it's a little small, but I'm. All right, that is a bit small. So I'm going to try and expand in a second here. Apologies. There we are. a little bit better. Oh, no. Sorry, let me see if I can pull it from. Can everyone see that okay, or is it still too small?
The text is quite small, but I don't.
You know, when you get to the drawings,
Yet the
Yes,
drawing may not need
we
to be
can-
that blown up.
but I see the plus and minus next to it 50%, and the plus is a handy way.
Sure. Because this is 62 right here, so let me start with 61. Oh, whoopsies. Apologies, sorry, seems like I downloaded the same thing twice. Just give me 1 second here. Okay.
No. Drawings.
Okay, it looks like the link that was the materials is have the same thing twice. So we can start with 62 Weston Street and go from there. It's probably so people don't have to keep watching me try and share. Okay. All right. This should be a little bit better here. So this is the application for 62 Weston Street to create 2 new lots with the appropriate frontage in the appropriate lot area requirements. Is this all right for the board, or should I try and expand it a little bit more? Let's see, that might be better. Justin, Dave, and members of the board, can you see this a little bit better?
Yes.
Well,
Okay.
I can see the drawing, but I can't read anything,
Right. Try and see.
which is where my question is going to come.
Right. Okay, let's see if I can.
See, this is the problem I'm talking about.
Right. Oh, it's very sensitive. Sorry.
If it's a Mac, Command Plus will take care of you.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it on my work laptop.
Well, there you go. It's not a Mac.
Control Plus would also work on Windows, I believe.
There we go.
Does it? Of
Should.
course it should, because Mac doesn't.
Oh, and of course it's not going to for me right now. Dave, I don't know if you might have some better luck than I.
Yeah.
Because I apologize for tech glitches here.
Yeah, it's kind
Well,
of hard to.
how many people have questions that need to get better views of this? I have a question. Technical, procedural question.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. The lot, whichever one's, the lot that is, the bottom one, the big one, the remainder
Yes.
has, it looks to me like wetland symbols all over the front part of it.
Yes.
And is that why we have the notation about a special permit being required?
The special permit is for the common driveway, which will be on the agenda for the next.
No, but why is the common driveway necessary in order to record the lot? It seems to me it's necessary. This is always an issue for me. There's no practical access to the upland on this lot. from the public way. Because of all that wetland. And I'm not, and that's been an issue as far as I'm concerned. It's a lot of times there's a little bit of upland next to the road, but it looks like not so here. So, either we say this plan is okay in spite of the fact that there's no practical access from the road, or we say it's not a viable lot that can be recorded as approval not required until the special permit is in place for the driveway.
Right, and I think the applicant was interested in getting at least the plot plan organized, so then submit their special permit application to be able to create that access to that third lot, that it's going to extend further out to overcome some of the issues with the access there, and through the only feasible means would be through the common driveway in order to bypass the issues with the wetlands, as well as create that. This is also on a scenic road, so they will be submitting an application for that as well. But given in light of the environmental and historic complexities of the site, the common driveway was, in the planning department's opinion, the only kind of means of access to get to that third lot to create for that third home there.
Am I correct that the access has to be resolved before it's a viable lot to be developed?
Go ahead, Eve.
I am not a lawyer, so I don't know from a legal perspective. I think that in the brief conversation that Fiona and I had with one of the staff for Concom, I think there are ways in which they could get a driveway through the wetland, which would not be ideal and would cost probably a lot of money and a lot of engineering. And so but I don't know that I don't know, and that's, I guess the board should decide. I don't know if that's a restriction that would not allow it to be a lot. It's not the best way to do it, and we think that the way they're proposing and need a special permit for would be a better route, but I don't know if you could say they can't do it. It's not really feasible financially or otherwise, and it would not be something that Concom would like to see, but I don't know if it's not allowed, I don't know if it's not feasible at all.
Yeah, well, that's my problem. I think that they have to have viable access on a public way, and to be a lot. It should be, I don't know. I think I have to, until that's resolved, I think I'd have to vote against it.
Yeah, I think
Just because of procedural.
I want to say there's something in the A&R handbook that at least comes close to addressing this question. It's been a while since I've read through that, so I don't remember what the issue is or what the deal is. Like I say, I do remember reading something that sort of fits this situation, but I don't remember. I'd have to go back and review that.
Yeah. Well, my point is I don't want to make a mistake.
Right. Yeah, I think, just off the top of my head, I think between some of the issues that Fiona had noted regarding details that may be missing from the plan, that we're probably looking at having to review this at a subsequent meeting. And once
We can't do that because of the deadline. And I don't know that there's any provision for requesting or granting an extension of the timeline. I think our only choice is to deny it and let them come back with the issues resolved.
which we've done before, as I recall. Alternatively, I think they withdraw the application here.
I was wondering.
I don't recall anything in the law saying that, but we could probably, if they asked us to allow them to withdraw it, we probably could vote that that's okay. Well, I don't hear any request to withdraw.
Yes, we don't seem to have a representative of the applicant present tonight, so
Quick question, Fiona. Is this the kind of thing that we need to explicitly say it's without prejudice if we deny? Or do they have a?
It's not a special permit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if,
I don't
if
think
it's
prejudice
the same
occurs, but-
submission, that was the reason I was just asking.
I don't think that that applies in A&R.
Yeah, I also do not believe that that applies here.
For the reasons discussed, I move that we deny the application.
For clarity, do you mean for just the 62 Weston Street, or are we talking for both, Rob, on your motion?
Well, since you took up one, let's do them one at a time.
Okay.
And the reasons discussed are this business about the access as well as the other faults that Fiona has documented.
All right. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
second.
I have a motion and a second to rule this does not satisfy the A&R requirements. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We ruled 62 Weston does not qualify as an A&R. Now bring us back up to 61 Weston.
Sure.
I make the same motion.
Let me pull. Natalia, you might be able to access this more readily than I did notice in the meeting materials. The same thing is attached twice, so.
No, the first one comes up right when I just checked it.
Do you mind sharing your screen? Because I seem to be looking at the same thing, the same plan that's attached in both links.
I wasn't sure, but I was wondering whether it was somehow the same plan. It looked very similar on my little screen.
It looks to me
Wait.
like 61, at least from my glancing at it, does not have the issue of access because the wetland is 62 primarily.
Right. Yes, it is different. I'm just my link that I'm looking at. I think that it was 62 on there twice for some reason. So, Natalia, do you have that readily available?
Does it matter? Does anybody need to look at it? I think
Got it here.
as far as the wetland issue is relative to whichever lot has the wetlands. And the motion for the other one can rely only on other faults that Fiona identified.
Understood.
Want to make the motion.
All right, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to deny the A&R for 61 Weston Street. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger,
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman,
Aye.
and I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. These are both not approved as approval not required this time. All right.
I think that was,
Well, they can fix it.
I know.
And I will work with the applicant to make sure that the next submission satisfies all the requirements and addresses everything that was outlined in the memo.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, can we also get a reading on the wetland thing,
Yes.
practical access? Maybe Dave can find his handbook. I've never seen an ANR.
I'll review I'll review the handbook and see if it has anything that speaks it. The handbook does go through a fair amount of review of case law that has come up in various oddball situations. It's rather interesting.
Is it in PDF form?
Yes.
Can you mail it to me?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I got it from. I think I got it from the CPTC, the Citizens Planner Training Collaborative. They got a whole bunch of materials on their website.
I found the A&R handbook link on mass.gov.
Oh, there you go.
That's
Yeah,
probably the exact same one.
That's where it comes from.
But anyway, so
And I'll also check with town council as well, make sure.
all right, sounds good. All right, we're 7 minutes of 7:30. I'll just say out loud, we'll take this up at 7:30, but we did have a request to continue the public hearing that is scheduled at 7:30. So if anyone is here for that, we're likely not take up any discussion and just vote to continue. But in that said, our next item on our agenda is a discussion item, the presentation for Tier 2 Complete Streets Prioritization Plan from CMRPC, Ian McKelvey. Is he on the call? Looks like
Yes,
he's in the participant. Yep,
I'm going to promote Ian to a panelist here.
please do.
All right. Is it my time?
Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Board, for agreeing to hold this discussion tonight. This is one of the last things that we're going to be doing before hopefully getting the Complete Streets Plan submitted. So I have a brief presentation that will go over the process of the plan as well as the initial list of project recommendations that I can work with to get in a final state. So I'm going to go ahead and share this screen. All right, can you all see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes, and that's
Great.
That's a photo from Grafton, right?
I was trying to find a good example of a complete street, so I was doing some Google imaging. This is actually from Kansas City, but we can go over some of the other
They drive on the left side, eh?
So thank you all for having me here tonight to go over your draft prioritization plan. The overview is we're going to go over sort of quickly for those who are on the call or listening in from home that might not understand the Complete Streets planning process. We're just going to go over that along with some of the tier 2 details. As you know, you're in the tier 2 out of 3 tiers for the Complete Streets program. I'm going to go over the project identification areas as well as proposed project details within each of the areas that we looked at. Allow for a time for you all to comment on the projects that I have proposed, and then we'll go over some final next steps for the tier 2 process and then the larger Complete Streets program. So this information was included pretty late in the pretty close to the meeting time. So we can, so if you have any questions about the materials, let me know, and I can feel free to send any updates to Fiona to send over to you to the board. So what is the purpose of the Complete Streets program? It is to determine areas, in town that are frequently used by residents and visitors, that are used by all types, whether it's cyclists, pedestrians, car users, anyone with disabilities, mobility, or otherwise, looking at an analysis of all of the conditions in these areas, and then to use policy and grant program mechanisms to implement the Complete Streets program in town. I say policy because you've passed a Tier 1 Complete Streets policy that was approved last year. And then grant program can be through the Complete Streets grant program or through other Mass DOT or other infrastructure related programs to implement projects that will allow for all users, whether they are road vehicle users, cyclists, or pedestrians, to be safe, to be able to use the streets safely and without distraction for all types, whether from the youngest of ages up to to the seniors in your community. So it's allowing for everyone to be able to utilize the town in any way they see fit getting around. And then finally, the purpose of the program is to then monitor and make further improvements over time, make changes to the Complete Streets plan as the town sees fit. So the details of the town's Tier 2 status is we completed fieldwork in summer of 2022 in 3 priority areas identified by the town planner at that time, and then utilizing additional fieldwork that was completed by CMRPC Transportation Department through their pavement management program and traffic counting mechanisms. We completed a dashboard of the pavement, sidewalk, and ramp conditions. The link is there. The link will be available in your materials, but let me know, and I will send Fiona and Natalia a link to the ArcGIS CMRPC dashboard for the town, and they can send it to you directly, so you have access to this information. It lists a lot of good information that I think is really useful when looking at the road and pavement conditions in town that can easily be expanded on as time goes on. We can always add to it. We met with the seniors, with some seniors at the senior center in September of 2022 to receive feedback on sort of project areas of concern within town that they know that they use, that others use, and then we, based on the analysis, the data collected, and some of the outreach conducted between October of last year and February of this year, we identified projects for consideration. And then finally, I put together this draft plan, more of a presentation, but based on your feedback, I will then put together the final prioritization plan, which is going to be a spreadsheet that can be submitted next month to MassDOT for their review and subsequent approval. And then once, what that means afterwards, we can go into later in the presentation. So here's just a quick little screenshot of the Grafton Complete Streets dashboard. I'm not going to go into it because that would require having to open up the link, and that could cause some issues, but it's take a chance to look through. It's very user-friendly in order to look at all the different parts of town to see sort of what the different status of the roads, of sidewalks, of ramps, just so you have an idea of what are some of these existing conditions, and they have changed over time. I know you've done some work last summer with some of the roads in town, so this is just a matter of, as we go through, keeping us up to date, we can update the dashboard so that there is sort of a live look at what some of the status conditions are in town. So we identified, the 3 major areas. Luckily, Grafton is really divided up into 3 major sort of clusters of development in town. You have North Grafton, which is around the Perry Mill Park areas up to North Grafton Elementary School. We did look at the wider area around there between the North Grafton sort of cluster development up to the train station. As well, we looked at the Central Grafton, which obviously is the common town hall, the high school, middle school, all the way over to the Millbury Street Elementary School, and then the another middle school that's sort of close to the Grafton town common area. We looked at that area. And then South Grafton, obviously we covered the South Grafton Elementary School and the area of town around that, and looked at the area around the Ferry Street Park and the cluster of neighborhood there. So here's a look quickly at part of the map of North Grafton that we looked at for future reference as we go through the different the sections in town. Green is identifying streets that are privately owned. Purple are streets that are town owned and maintained, and you'll see there at the bottom a little bit of Worcester Street that's red. That is owned by the state. Something to note is that Complete Streets cannot fund state-owned roads, or could fund improvements to state-owned roads, but if you do see a major need on a state-owned road, we can include it in the plan, and that just alerts MassDOT that this is something that the town is interested in improving, and they can maybe in the future incorporate that into their list of capital improvements. So, and I'll go through all of this here. for North Grafton, we looked at sort of North Main Street, looking at sidewalk improvements to both sides. There are sidewalks there, as well as maybe including a bike lane that goes from Worcester Street all the way up to North Grafton Elementary to allow for some families or kids to be able to cycle to and from sort of these areas. We looked at the area around the Mill Street and the Perry Street Park and are identifying sidewalk improvements and some striping upgrades to those areas that have some sidewalks. I did drive through it, and the sidewalks are there, but they're sort of cracked and in a little bit of a rough condition. And this is something that we're also going to be looking at incorporating into the Mill Street Park design project that that CMRPC is also assisting the town with through a DLTA project. We looked at the Waterville Street from Westboro Road up to Prospect Street, adding some sidewalks on the school and cemetery side, and then East Street, which looking at maybe a sidewalk I said on the northern side, but after I drove through that area, I would say probably a sidewalk on the southern side that's where most of the houses are. And I would probably take away the bike lane in both directions, just given the narrowness of that street. But I think a sidewalk could still be feasibly put in there. Looked at Institute Road. So I know that is an area where there's an ongoing sort of development of houses going in. Having a sort of a shared use path or a sidewalk on each side would be preferable. And then Westboro Street, looking at a shared use path on either the north or south side. So these are some of the projects these are the projects that we have identified and are recommending. And I can provide you a full list of all the projects after in a separate email, but I just sort of pulled from a master list to put into this presentation. So Central Grafton, I sort of divided up into 3 areas. So part 1, looking at the Worcester Road from the Wheeler Road side, there's a gap in the sidewalk along that side of the street, but I looked closer at another Mass DOT inventory, and there's a part of Worcester Street or in this area that the town does own, so it's something that can be placed. I looked at Snow Road between Maxwell Drive and East Street, so looking at where Maxwell Drive is going north, to be putting in a sidewalk on one side. The Maxwell Drive is where the Grafton Housing Authority is located. I think it's important to include areas around that, the Grafton Housing Authority complex. And then Carroll Road from Worcester Street to Bicknell Street. That is another area that was identified during the outreach that there is lack of sidewalk so on that street that people would like to walk on. So I said preferably the west side that would really would connect a development a little bit further north towards the end of Carroll Road and the intersection of Bicknell Street down to where you have some shopping opportunities there. So the central part of Grafton, part 2, we're looking at the middle of Grafton to around the Grafton Common. This area is a little bit in better condition, especially around the town common. But one thing that I want to look at including, and preferably high up on the prioritization plan, and I'll take your input on this, is to look at installing improvements at the Oak Street Brigham Hill Road intersection, where a lot of cars go through that on Providence Road, but there's a lot of cars trying to cross or turn one way or another. So sidewalk crossing, and then other pavement improvements at that intersection to make it safer for those trying to cross the road, especially getting from the town hall or the middle of high school into the middle of the town center. Looked at Oak Street from Brigham Hill Road to Worcester Street. That sidewalk on one side of the road could use some improvements, possibly has already been improved since then. And then the Worcester Street from Carroll Road to Millbury Street, that is a high impact corridor that I saw people walking and trying to bike down, but there's really there's sidewalks on part of it, but then it just sort of suddenly ends. So putting in some sidewalks on that side. And then Millbury Street, Oak Place to Providence Road, just sort of including in this area some more sidewalk improvements just to make sure that that areas outside of this central portion of town can really access the main portion of town, which has a lot of good shops in the town common and is a really viable destination. And then finally, the third part of Central Grafton is really looking at Millbury Street from Providence Road all the way down to Crosby Road, where we do have the Millbury Street Elementary School, having some sidewalk additions or a shared use path on one side so that families and kids can go from the elementary school into the town center area for any sort of events. They could do that after school, or they could have some classes, walk, be able to access this area since it's not a very far area. And I think it's a good connection. And then finally, this one, so South Grafton, I looked at a lot. And so the next page, the recommendations are going to be very small, but I'm going to focus on some of the big areas that in town that I'm looking at. So this is really a big area of focus, and also a note that it is also the town's environmental justice area that sort of goes from the south side of Main Street, from Pleasant Street all the way over to Providence Road, and then all down along Ferry Street and Depot Street. So the Mass DOT does like to look at towns focusing on environmental justice areas, and that is a big push. And as I drove through there one day a couple weeks ago, I noticed that there were lacking a lot of pedestrian improvements outside of that Main Street area, which was recently redone and redone really very nicely. So the main areas I will look at is really the Sampson, Orchard Street, English Row, Ferry Street neighborhood that's really clustered right there next to the Ferry Street Park, including some sort of sidewalk improvements or signage or striping improvements in that area to really provide it a more safer streetscape, because there are a lot of older houses that are along there and really no safe walking establishments. And yes, cars do usually go slower through there, but Orchard Street especially can be considered a cut through, which could provide a lot of cars going faster. So having some sort of pedestrian improvements there would be nice, as well as another neighborhood on the other side to the east side of the river that doesn't really include any sort of pedestrian features or pedestrian facilities there. So looking at that, and then as well as the area around the South Grafton Elementary School, looking at maybe including a bike lane that connects along Pleasant Street that connects South Grafton to the center of Grafton, and some other improvements really just in this area. So looking mostly at sidewalks improvements, given the narrowness of the roads. And I'm sorry that it looked like the writing that I had when I put it into the PDF or presentation cut off a little bit, but that does say at the bottom, the sidewalk improvements in addition on the west side of the street. So those are the streets that we've really taken a look at and provided some project recommendations on. So now I kind of want to open up to the board and sort of some comments on the project that I've recommended. Are there certain areas in town that should be added that we should look at sort of between now and the final plan? Are there projects on certain streets that I mentioned that should be added or removed? And then should there be certain areas in town that we've looked at, but we should look at a little bit closer that you think should provide some maybe unique project recommendations? And so when I say in terms of projects that could be implemented through Complete Streets, we're talking anything surface at or above grade. So nothing utility wise, but whether it's installation or improvements of sidewalks, streets going through a road diet, or adding in certain striping for bike lanes, either shared or separate bike lanes, anything lighting, signals, signage that could be added in town to make more awareness of pedestrians and cyclists in the area, just to make everything safer for them. So for now, I will pause for a minute. I will close out my screen just for some comments, and then I'll open up the presentation just for the last couple slides that just sort of give next steps.
So the first thing that just comes to mind that is, Not Carlux is a fairly new project happening, which is there's a lip project that is, I forget if the select board had voted in favor of it yet or not, but that's going on Snow Road.
Mhm.
Theory going on Snow Road. It's basically between Maxwell Drive and Suzanne Terrace. That is on the opposite side from Maxwell Drive, but it's going on there. It's going to be, I forget how many units, but it's a decently sized lit program, and that intersection of Worcester Street right there. I know Worcester Street is State Road, but the intersection there is going to be problematic to say the least once that is fully built up. There's no light at that intersection, but just a few feet down the road is one at the intersection where Stop and Shop is there.
Mhm.
So that's just something that might be worth being aware of and kind of thinking about as we go down this process.
And you said Maxwell Drive to,
It's between Maxwell Drive and Suzanne Terrace. I forget the exact location on Snow Road.
Yeah,
25?
It's just up the, up from
Is it
Worcester Street,
25?
it's a little bit past, past the shopping center area there.
Yep.
And as part of that project, as I recall, they are doing some improvements to Snow Road. That's more, I think it's a turning lane or something.
Yes.
So there's, there's some work being proposed as part of that project, whenever the project gets approved, assuming it does eventually.
Mhm.
And Mr. Hassinger, go ahead.
Yeah, I think maybe some people watching this might like to know at a basic level what the impact of this plan is.
Mhm.
It is probably saying these are things we think we should do something about. But beyond that, what are we? Who has to decide and approve the plan, and
Mhm.
what impacts will they need or want to know about for the time?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. And this is something I was going to cover after this, but I'm happy to talk about it now. So the plan, once after this meeting tonight, what I will do is then take any input or any, if I have to look at other projects or take something away, what I will create is a final prioritization plan, which is just going to be a giant, big spreadsheet for Mass DOT. Once that's approved, it shows that the town has identified these areas, these streets for improvements. Now, what's in the final plan is not, the final you can only do. So say on Snow Road, we recommend in the plan sidewalk improvements, but something else changes. It's not we saying we can only do sidewalks there, but it shows that this is a important street, important location for improvements. So what then the town can do is hire a design consultant to look at a particular area that's identified in the complete streets plan. They will do the final design to say what exactly can and cannot be done and how much it will cost. I'll provide in the plan an estimate based on some standard, 20 feet per linear foot of sidewalk or something like that. But the designer will say it'll cost $400,000 to do this, which is feasible given the size constraints of the street. Then the town can apply for complete streets funding to do the actual installation work. So it's not a definite, this is what we want done, or this is what can be done, but this is what we want completed. And the designer, when you get into that phase, will take a look to see, okay, you want sidewalks on both sides, but the street really isn't wide enough for sidewalks on both sides, but can do a sidewalk on one side. And in order to prioritize what is really feasible given the size constraints.
Who picks which projects out of the plan
Mhm.
are to be pursued, and who? It would seem to me it's some combination of the selectman and the town administrator.
Yeah, so
Not the
really,
planning.
so it could be, it all depends on how you want to set up the design or the selection process and the approval process. Each town does it a little bit differently. What I would imagine it is a combination or discussion between the highway department or the DPW, I forget how you have it set up in town, and the planning board, which is acting as the complete streets committee. So it is a combination of you, the highway department, as well as the town administrator, and maybe bringing in the select board. So it all depends on how you want to pursue design selection from this point going forward. but it's really important to have the highway or DPW department included in the conversations from the beginning, as the funding for Complete Streets acts very much like Chapter 90. So whereas they will get the funding into their department, and so that's why it's important to have them in the conversation with design or for project selection from the very beginning.
So who has to approve the plan?
The planning board will approve the plan, acting as the Complete Streets Committee, and then it'll go to Mass DOT for their final approval.
Okay.
The funding you mentioned, just to ask, is it that the town fills out essentially a grant proposal and submits for a grant, or is it a directed funding source separate than typical grants?
Yes, so you will apply for a grant through an application process that is, I believe, twice a year it opens up. So you will, and the design has to be completed. So the design can't be funded through the tier 2 process. You'd have to fund that through either private or through another form of funding that you have, or through Chapter 90. And you can apply for up to $300,000 for the actual construction of the Complete Streets improvements.
Is that 300,000 one time or all in total?
300,000 per project.
Okay.
And you can apply for, it's one project at a time.
So the planning board would be looking to initiate the project, find funding for the engineering, and so on.
You would initiate the project, and I will double check. I'll read through the policy that was put together last year to see who exactly has the funding. That should be in the policy. I didn't have a hand in crafting it, so I'll have to double check. But and we can revisit this at the next meeting when you approve the plan, and so I'll write that down to double check. But if it is what I believe, you would initiate the process of, saying, we would like to have this project. We would like to look at Main Street, for example, from point A to point B. You would then make a recommendation to the select board to direct the town administrator and DPW director to apply for funding for design, and they would have the final approval, or however the town sets up the decision-making process.
Okay. Let's see how that all works out.
Yeah,
I
recommend.
I can think of a lot more projects that I'd like on that list, like the road in front of her house, my house, and his house, which is looking like an $8 million project at the moment.
Yeah, and so that's the glory of this process, that you can always sort of tailor to the needs, and you can always work with Mass DOT to update the plan once completed, given when new projects, sort of development projects, come online or are proposed through the town in the future.
Yeah, I think Mr. Hassinger's road is going to be much bigger than this will allow us to tackle.
That's a whole other topic.
Yes.
But we do have a lot of two-rod roads that don't fully satisfy Complete Streets requirements, shall I say.
Yeah.
Like they're 16 feet wide, and some of them are passable on foot, not all of them.
I'm not sure that Estabrook is even 16.
Yeah,
No,
as far as this
isn't.
list of projects is concerned, having not seen it until just a few minutes ago, I don't have anything that off the top of my head that I see that I would suggest adding to it, but there's always, and of course I think I understood you to say we can modify the list over time. We can update it as we see fit, but as a starting point, I think it covers the areas of town that I would have thought we ought to cover. There's a lot of potential projects in there. We're not, obviously not going to do them all at once, but having kind of nailed down this list of at least this initial list of Complete Streets projects, it then gives us some basis for prioritizing particular projects and, moving forward, selecting projects that we want to move forward with soon and others that, we'd like to do it all at once, but realistically, we'll have to prioritize because there's a lot here.
There is, yes. What I would like to ask the board is between the North Grafton, Central Grafton, and South Grafton areas, is there one area in particular that you would like to see sees their projects higher up on the list than others, or is there at this time is it sort of just a all is important sort of agreement?
I don't think I'd want to be
Taking
just
that
right offhand, given the way Grafton has worked. Not sure that I'd want to say one of the sections of town
That's fine. That's
is
fair.
preferred. Each section of town already thinks it's disadvantaged over the others.
No, that's fair. And as I was saying the question, I realized that it would be difficult to choose.
Yeah. I'll
What
I'll say from just my seat, it does seem like there is a more propensity for businesses and other, potential reasons people would want to walk in Central and even North Grafton than in South as a whole. But that said, it also, I think, doing this in South would make it more likely that businesses would want to move into those parts. And South has been, at least from my perspective, historically, under directed when it comes to resources as well. That's my personal take.
Okay. And I would also like to add that, when it comes in the list, you don't have to go the first one, then the second one, then the third one. The list does show a little bit of, here's some of the bigger priorities are going to be at the top of the list, but at any time you can say, we want to pursue number 32. Like that could be the first project that you pursue. You don't have to cross off and slowly go down the list. You can choose whichever at any time.
South Grafton is just getting sidewalks and a more or less complete design, a design that at least satisfies Mass Highway all the way from 122 to the town line.
Yes.
And so that's the most walked place, no doubt, because people are coming and going all through. So it is getting some attention. So some of this, I don't know how well bicycles are accommodated, but as well as the right of way will allow.
And that's why I would think to recommend as I was looking at it, and I can further tweak it between now and the next meeting, sort of looking at maybe proposing bicycle lanes on the bigger and the more main roads that connect the different parts of town rather than the smaller neighborhood type of roads. And then focusing really everywhere on the sidewalks, on improving sidewalks or adding sidewalks where they don't exist to connect the sidewalk network that you have, because the sidewalks, while the main point of them is for people to walk on, they do provide in times a second a safety area for cyclists to go when the road might be a little too narrow or dangerous.
Right. I think you said that this can't apply to the state maintained roads, which means people need to understand that even though Worcester Street, for example, could sure use some improvement in some of these areas, it's, I think from its entire length is state managed, and 140 Upton Street from just a little off the common at the old DPW barn down to Upton is also state. So I'm sure that some people are going to come around and say, hey, you got to get some sidewalks along Worcester Street.
I do have one thing that we didn't happen to bring up. Off of the common, of course, we have the library with its new addition, and believe me, it's heavily used. And I have wondered about the crossing from, if you come up North Street, kids walk up North Street in front of the Grafton Inn and cross across to the library. When we were approving that was an area of concern, that making sure that there's some sort of crosswalk or something there, or a crossing, even on demand.
Are you
There
talking
is
from
crosswalk.
directly in front of the Grafton Inn to the library on that same side of the street, or are you talking?
Yes, it's parallel to South Street. Okay.
Well,
It would be across Upton Street in 140, but it's on the opposite side of South Street, if you will.
Yeah.
Kids can cut through, and you can get there without going around the inn.
I'm not sure. I think that there is sidewalk in front of the library and in
Yes.
front of the inn, and I'm pretty sure that there's a crosswalk there. I think there should be, but I remember we had discussions about the place you really needed a crosswalk was behind the inn. I'm not sure whether you can, because kids, that's a shorter way to get to the new front door of the library. You know what I'm saying? Back around the McGill building and behind the inn, and crossing
through the parking lot.
So basically, we have in case Ian isn't that familiar with that corner, we have the crosswalk closer to the Grafton Common that goes right across Upton Street, right at that corner that it connects to the common area. But where Bob is talking and Linda about is that about maybe 400 feet, maybe less down the road, toward Upton, closer to where the main parking area for the library is, might be a better spot for having a crosswalk so that is a little bit further from the corner, but might have better usage as far as like he's saying if kids come across.
That is the entrance to the library right off the parking lot. So you really, let me tell you, kids are not going around and go to the corner.
Well, the thing is that they have to cross private land and hopefully not use the railroad right of way. Got through there, so that needs a little thinking, looking at.
I can take a look at that after this and see what sort of improvements I think could be done, and then definitely highlight that area so that if you do want to explore adding some sidewalk pavement markings or maybe some ramps, you could have an engineer look at that closer and see what is definitely feasible.
Good.
So any other comments on the projects that I proposed? And if you do take a look at the list after today, and I'll send a more just one-page sheet that I have of all the projects to Fiona and Natalia to send over to you all. I will include my email if you have some ideas that you want to sort of send my way. I can make sure to get that included into the final prioritization plan that you can take a look at it and finally improve.
You'll have the dashboard link in there too.
I'll include the dashboard link there as well. So I'm going to share my screen one last time for the final few steps. So the next steps for the Tier 2 process would be to review comments from this meeting. I'll review some comments from this meeting, take a look at some of these areas, and then as well as anything you might provide after today. I will provide the town and planning board with the Tier 2 prioritization plan spreadsheet, and the planning board, you can review the plan and then adopt it at your next meeting. So this is going to be a fairly short turnaround, but once everything's there, it's easy to just sort of insert it into this spreadsheet. We would like to submit this the prioritization plan that's approved ideally to Mass DOT by April 1st is when they have their first, it's the spring block deadline for tier 2 review. If we submit it after the fact, that's perfectly okay. The next deadline is October, but usually they can review it in the interim and provide feedback. I think we've done that with some other towns in the past. And then as I say, after that, Mass DOT will review and either accept or reject the plan with feedback. We've never really had a plan be rejected. They just provide some comments to things to think about in the future. And then your town is a complete streets community, and you are eligible to provide to apply for tier 3 grants that will do the actual construction of the project. As I said before, the design is not fundable, but once you have a design in place, you can then apply and then get that funding. Right now, as we know, as we've heard in the past, and I think it's the same, the getting approval for a complete streets plan is about at 70% accepted once you apply for a grant. And then there's always updates to the plan, and there's future funding. The funding for the future could be increased. It's possible. And then could be that you can then apply for, and maybe in the future, Mass DOT will revise the funding restrictions. And so you can apply for state-owned roads. With this, new administration, things could change, and with the future additional funding coming for complete streets, things could change in the future going forward. So I think this is an exciting time for Grafton to become a complete streets community, because there's all sorts of opportunities available. And I think just sort of seeing some of the projects, or having identified some of the projects and looking and having driven parts of town, I think it is really good to connect to already the good sidewalk and pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure that you do have already. I think there's really good opportunities to connect to the different parts of town and to have a more built out accessible network of routes you can take.
If there's one thing we hear over and over again, for as long as I can remember, it's we need more sidewalks. We want to see more sidewalks. So this may help us in that direction.
Yeah. There comes a point in this process where the town has to decide to come up with money for engineering. How assured is the town that if they spend that money, they will get the project funded by the state?
So as I said, once you apply for the competitive grant, it's right now it's about a 70% acceptance rate, which is or 70 to 80. I'll double check that number for you if I can find some of that information, but I'm fairly confident that if the town does apply for something, that you could get funded. If not, the design is always good. You can always apply for future funding, as well as some other sort of sources of funding to do road infrastructure, whether that through a community one-stop of the number of different grant programs under the community one-stop umbrella, including STRAP grant or through MassWorks, through Complete Streets, through really any infrastructure related program that is out there. And I'm sorry that I'm blanking on some additional ones right now, but usually they like to see a design having been completed. So even if something isn't funded through the Complete Streets program, you have a design that's ready to go for any other grant program that maybe has some better success rate. But we've rarely seen a Complete Streets project in our region not be funded. So I think you're in pretty good hands once you have the design in hand.
Does the design process work interactively with Mass Highway, so that when you get your plan done, Mass Highway is satisfied with it?
Yes. So usually you'll want to work with a designer that has experience working with getting designs to Mass Highway standards. And I'm confident that any civil engineer in Massachusetts knows how to design a road to their standards. So that is it. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I'll offer one last chance for any other questions. And if not, next steps will be I will put together the final plan and get that over to Natalia and Fiona for the next planning board meeting.
Sure. So, if we do have thoughts after this meeting, or any member of the public comes to one of us or Fiona with thoughts, what's the deadline you would like to have them by in order to complete this in time for our next meeting on the 27th?
Yes. So looking at the calendar, the next meeting is the 27th.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I would say if you could get it, if you any comments by the end of this week,
Okay.
that'll give me early next week to finalize the plan and get that to you in advance so you have time to review it on your own before coming to the planning board meeting.
Sounds great to me.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, board, and I hope you have a great rest of your night and
Thank you.
stay safe tomorrow.
For the board, do we want to explicitly have staff send this off to the town administrator and the select board for any explicit feedback on this before Ian finalizes the plan? See if they can get anything back to us by Friday. Do we want to do that? I know
That should have been included a little more earlier. I'd like to see it, though, get in the morning, in the spring cycle.
I agree.
So that really makes it pretty tight.
Yeah.
But certainly you can consult with the administrator.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear from any planning and any select board members, but I don't know whether you can have a formal on their agenda kind of
It's not till
thing.
next week.
Yeah, I don't think we can get anything formal from a select board meeting in time for this, but we can certainly have non-quorumed responses sent to our staff.
But apparently we have a process
Yep.
Where we can modify the plan
Yes.
anyway to as this it's going to take a while. This is going to trickle out and people are begin to catch on. That's another way to approach things and come and ask that they be put in it and all that kind of thing. So doing it now and getting going is probably better, and letting those more things come along when they come along.
Yep.
And deal with them rather than spending 6 months going around now.
Yeah. So I think what I'll propose for our staff is that when Ian sends this, list over, that Fiona pass that list on to the town administrator and the select board, noting that our deadline for any comments is the end of this week, so that we can share that off. But the intent for us as a board is to have this finalized in time for an April 1st submission.
And so Fiona, when you pass that on, include that business about it's easy, and the process will allow us to make modifications.
Yes.
So we're not giving them 3 days for a major thing. And, it's going to.
Absolutely. I will do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're gonna, since it is past 7:30, we do have a public hearing on our agenda. The applicant did submit a request to continue, so I think we should just take that up and take care of that.
I move to grant the applicant's written request to continue the hearing until March 27th,
Yes.
Second.
Yes.
7:30.
All right. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
I was about to ask a question, Justin, if you don't mind. Can I vote on this?
This is just to continue the hearing, so yes.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
Then aye.
the eligibility comes up to
for the decision.
vote on the approval
Okay.
down the way.
Okay. I vote aye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. All right, so that is our one and only public hearing for the night. So our next discussion item is MBTA community zoning discussion of potential districts for compliance.
So Justin, I can just share my screen
Sure.
properly this time where people can see it. The text is a lot bigger. Is this okay? Can folks see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So the MBTA communities zoning, we all know that is going to be coming up very soon, and Grafton is a little bit ahead of the game, which is nice. We do have, based on our action plan, examined 3 districts, as well as others, but we were really hyper-focusing on 3 districts for compliance that already comply with the zoning as it's written currently. So District 1 is the North Grand, the R40R, 8 Pine Street. The second district is what we're titling VMU-11, which consists of 100, 120, and 122 Westboro Road, and a VMU just DR1, which is a area encompassed by the Blackstone River and Providence Road, and those good parcels in between here. So when we ran the analysis, as I mentioned, the districts comply as they currently exist. The underlying zoning fulfills requirements in terms of contiguous parcels, density, as well as unit capacity. I know that we are having, of course, our conversation about modifying parking in the Village Mixed Use District. So I wanted to examine alternate options that were also discussed in our action plan, just to give us some scenarios, additional scenarios that we could turn to if possible. So I did ask CMRPC to run a couple of area snapshots. I pulled a few districts here in the residential multifamily district. This area here, which is encompassed by 29 Pullard Road to 188 Providence Road, as well, and that we're titling that residential multifamily 15. I also looked at this small parcel here encompassed by Millbury Street, West Street, Church Street, and Providence Road, which is our residential multifamily 16 area. I also looked at the contiguous parcels in our RMF 18 area, which is boxed in by Millbury Street, Oak Street, and Providence Road, as you can see here. And so I just wanted to give us some additional scenarios. I know that we also discussed at the last meeting that we were talking about an overlay district that had more stringent requirements than other areas, so that we could potentially think about pursuing the parking, continue our parking discussion for the village mixed use while having, you know, the area underneath this in our new MBTA communities zoning districts be adhering to the village mixed use parking requirements as they are now. When we ran the compliance model, which is kind of we input all of the data and then it really spits out, okay, yes, this works, or no, it doesn't. So when we ran it we did a variety of different scenarios, and CMRPC helped me with this. We ran our 8 Pine Street, our village mixed use areas, and with the zoning as it currently is, and as I mentioned under this scenario, the model indicated that the requirements were fulfilled, which would be the path of least resistance in Grafton. I did have them run a overlay scenario, trying to kind of see if we can come to a compromise with our proposed zoning changes as well as our requirements for compliance. When we ran the model, it did not work favorably in an overlay scenario, unfortunately. So the model indicated that the minimum multifamily unit capacity of 776 would not be met. So again, that would have been an ideal situation for all parties. Unfortunately, if the way that the districts are structured with an overlay situation would just unfortunately not work for us. So I had CMRPC run
Before you get any farther into this, I think I need to point out a problem here. That it was a mystery to me how the overlay situation would not comply. And what I see here is that it is this calculation assumes a maximum of 16 units per lot. And I can't even begin to imagine where that comes from. There is the basic village mixed-use zoning is a 16 units per acre maximum, but it is not a 16 unit per lot maximum. So can you explain where that 16 units per lot comes from?
Yes, so what CMRPC did was they took because ultimately it's going to be a regulation that allows multifamily by right. So we were using these under current zoning, the village mixed use district allows 8 units by right with 16 for a special permit. So we plugged in the 16 that would be allowed by right.
Yeah, but that's 16 per acre, and you've got 16 per lot here.
Okay, yeah, so I'll have to chat with CMRPC about that. When we entered in the data, I was assuming that we were going to be using the minimum density requirements for acreage.
Yep. Yeah, and just one other comment while we're on the topic of an overlay. Whether the MBTA zone is specified as an overlay zone or a base zone should make no difference from a compliance perspective. Because if you're building under the overlay, you're building to whatever the requirements are for an overlay. So you can, when you have an overlay, you can build either under the overlay or under the base zoning. But when you're on an overlay, nothing in the base zone applies. So I think there's some problems here in terms of how the inputs to the analysis. I hate to sort of continue my interruption, but I'll mention one more thing, in that even in the first scenario with a couple of the village mixed use zones, the numbers you've got there, the numbers that come out here are for the mixed use zones are very different from the numbers that I got when I did this, essentially the same analysis. So it would be very interesting to me to see the whole spreadsheet, basically the assumptions that were plugged into this, to see either I did something wrong or one of the assumptions plugged in here it's not the same as what I've used. So I would certainly appreciate the opportunity to review this and sort of get some greater degree of consistency between the analysis I did and what you've got here.
Absolutely, yes, Dave. We can do that. That sounds like a good idea. We can touch base and revisit, and I'll show you how we plugged it into the model, and we'll also get CMRPC to weigh in on that as well.
Yeah. So anyway, we've got some other scenarios that you were looking at here, and I interrupted you. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Yep, no problem. And please feel free to interrupt me. This is definitely a conversation. I just, feel free to just jump in. So essentially when we ran our third scenario, which was incorporating some of the residential multifamily districts that were proposed, which obviously that could be, a big change for folks in Grafton, and it wouldn't be the, ideal scenario, but it's definitely something that we talked about in our action plan. So I wanted to just try and evaluate what that would look like, and have CMRPC plug that in. And when we ran the scenario 3, which is 8 Pine Street, our 2 village mixed use areas, and then 2 of our proposed residential multifamily districts, the 8 Pine Street used its current zoning, and the rest of the districts used the village mixed use values, and those came out to be compliant. The 4th scenario was an overlay option, which did not comply. It's the same scenario with 8 Pine Street, our 2 village mixed use, and our 2 residential multifamily as an overlay. And we're always running into, it seems, with the overlay analysis, which obviously warrants more discussion with CMRPC, but it seems like our minimum, we're coming up short on our minimum multifamily unit capacity. So every time it seems to that seems to be the big sticking point there. So ultimately, we wanted to just kind of give a diverse array of options. So I did have 6 scenarios ran. The 5th is our, again, those 3 districts that we're continuing to use for our compliance. Village, 8 Pine or Village Mixed Use, and then a different compilation of our residential multifamily districts, this time using 15 and 18. When 8 Pine Street used its current zoning and the residential multifamily zoning specs were utilizing VMU values, this did check out. Again, this warrants a discussion with the board about how feasible this would be. I did want to provide options based on our action plan, but I think realistically, the board should evaluate if even looking at residential multifamily zoning specs and changing those is realistic for Grafton. And lastly, the last scenario was a different, another compilation of residential multifamily 15 and 18 as an overlay, and all of the area specs in this model were based on the village mixed use values, and they did come out to being compliant. So, we have a few scenarios here that work and a few, that do not. These are preliminary findings, of course, warranting continued analysis and more discussion, but I wanted to show the board that we're really trying to make headway with this. We're trying to look at different options that we have available to us, and what realistically we can and can't do, and just kind of glean some initial feedback so I can go back to the drawing board with CMRPC and talk to them further about this. This last slide is really just a side-by-side comparison that was ran, where we look at how the Dave, some of your scenarios that were compared to what we were done here, and you can see the contiguous area doesn't always pan out, but with Dave, with your analysis and my addition of the residential multifamilies using districts 16 and 17, we were able to get 52% of contiguous area, and with Dave, your analysis, and then my versions with the residential multifamily district 17 and 18, we were at 54. So, we're just over that 50% with these scenarios. But again, these are preliminary scenarios and warrant more discussion, and continued analysis. But this is kind of where what we've done, and how, and CMRPC will be at our meeting on the 27th to talk through this as well. But, I think, again, to Dave's point earlier, like we can continue to play with the model and see what works. But as of right now, with our 3 districts up here, our Pine Street and our 2 village mixed use, we are looking like we are in a good place. So, again, happy to take comment from the board, talk through some concerns. And then, we can, I can go back and talk to our technical assistance team and see how we can rework this and maybe think of different strategies. I did ask about 5 Millennium, because that is a district that is obviously very close to the train station and is slated for, they're currently in the LIP proposal application phase with the ZBA. Well, I think that they're going to be in front of the ZBA relatively soon. So I wanted to kind of consider that too. This isn't in this analysis because I didn't get that data until yesterday. But looking at 5 Millennium for compliance, it looked like an overlay situation there would have not worked out. But if 5 Millennium were to adopt village mixed use specs and those zoning values, we would be in a good place with that as well. So, it's something that, this is really scenarios to consider. So I would love to hear back from the board about your kind of initial thoughts and what you want from me to go back to the team with, to kind of rework and make sure that this is, these scenarios are something that A, we want to pursue, B, the right moves for Grafton, and C, if we have to rework the data, then absolutely can do that.
How long do we have until we have to decide on something to put forward?
So we are lucky enough to be kind of ahead of the game, but ultimately we would try and get this finalized for the next town meeting. Our final deadline to get everything done is December 2024. So we do have some time, but obviously it needs to pass.
All right. We have 4 town meetings between now and when we could wait until the fall town meeting of next year and still do what we need to do.
We could. I think I would, my sense is that the sooner the better, but we can, that is definitely an option. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just, this is going to come up a lot. Trying to make any sense out of this when we haven't been deeply involved in all of the different areas and whatnot, and how many acres and how to read these things. Get a headache.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a good bit of time needed.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing. Let me just repeat again. I would like to see everything that went into these analyses as a means of sort of validating it. Because as I said, my analysis of the rough equivalent of the first scenario here came up with some different numbers than this has. So I'd like to understand why. Again, the problem I pointed out with the assumption, the incorrect 16 units per lot assumption for the overlays, that needs to be corrected. In addition, there are probably quite a few other scenarios that we could look at. One that I've thought about but not done any analysis on was sort of utilizing RMF, or a portion of the RMF that the number 15, I think, but the one I was thinking about was a somewhat smaller area, but as we said, we have until the end of next year to get this all nailed down. But something to think about as we move forward with this is obviously we have to. We're going to be making some sort of zoning change. As a minimum, if we leverage the village mixed use zoning pretty much as it is, I think we need to bump up the threshold for as of right. For my analysis, I bumped it up from 8 to 12. And that's a relatively minor tweak. If we think about either rezoning or redefining a portion of the RMF zone, that's a bigger ask of town meeting. And my tendency is to think that as we get farther into the master plan process, we'll get a better sense of whether more incentives or making multifamily development easier in some fashion, in combination of incentives on it, whatever it is. If the master plan process gets to a point where it seems like that's what we really want to do, then with that behind us, it becomes easier to get that through town meeting. But where I'm going with that is that if we satisfy ourselves that the combination of North Grafton Transit Village Overlay District and the two VMUs, the whole of VMU TV and a portion of VMU South Grafton, if we can put together those 3 districts in a way that complies with MBTA zoning, then that's something that would be a relatively minimal change to zoning and might turn out to be very easy to pass. So if nothing else, we'll keep that in our back pocket as we know we can do this, and we have a high degree of confidence we could do that. Something more comprehensive or in different areas of town that might be a heavier lift, which with some master plan work behind us on that might turn out to be doable. But for now, what we need to satisfy 3A is enough zoning in place that would hypothetically allow the required amount of development. And again, we have to keep in mind, 3A does not require even one single unit of actual development. All it requires is zoning that hypothetically someday could allow that development by right.
Correct.
And
Yes.
that-
Yes.
that-
And that's,
it's a point
you
that
know,
right. It's a point that people continually get confused on. Yeah, we're not saying the MBTA law requires us to develop 1,000 units. It
Yeah.
requires us to zone for 776 units. That's it.
But also, it doesn't, I'm not clear whether, or I want us to be clear whether it has to be undeveloped land or
No.
whether it's land that already has something else on it.
It can be fully developed. Every square inch of that zone can be fully developed. And as long as the zoning allows multifamily by right, it
Yeah.
satisfies the law.
So
Into a question.
I want to
right.
Oh.
raise a thought for Fiona and kind of the board, that Fiona mentioned that you have the CMRPC expected to come up March 27th to talk about this further. One thought I just had looking at our agenda for the 27th, we have 4 new public hearings as well as 2 continued to the 27th. That, you know, and we're likely to be talking about some of the other Springtown meeting agenda items that we have for like the warrant articles and such. It might make more sense if the board wants to push this a little bit to see if CMRPC can make the April 10th meeting or even the one after that, since we don't have as much of an urgency for this topic.
Sure, absolutely. I can connect with CMRPC and just explain that our next agenda is quite full, and we should. I don't foresee an issue there.
Yeah. Between now and town meeting, things will get,
Heated.
And I don't foresee the board, at least at the state things are currently in on this topic, that we would have something for town meeting for this spring.
oh no.
I don't.
No,
see that
certainly
happening.
not. It's more of like a a snapshot of kind of where we are, what we're looking at now, trying to kind of get ahead of the curve, and just having that preliminary conversation with you all, do your comfort level with what's proposed for these scenarios.
Well, like I do. Linda wants to say something.
It's really just sort of tangential to this a little bit, but one of the things that'll make it a better sell is I don't know what's happening with Pine Street with construction there. That's kind of been bogged down. I'm wondering how the planning department's kind of following that.
Right. So we are continuing to talk to GSX about that property. I do know that it is for sale, but we are hopeful that they have reassured us that they're going back to their investors and reevaluating and will be moving forward. But however, we're continuing to have those conversations with them, so nothing has been finalized yet. We are, obviously very hopeful that will continue to stay on the correct path that was originally promised.
Yeah, because that makes things a harder sell to the town when you get projects that are started and they just sit there and spin their wheels, and then the next project comes along and the town is asked to vote something in, and they say, well, wait a minute, what's happening with XYZ down the way? And I think that's something we have to be sensitive to, that when projects die, a classic example is the gas station, once upon a time gas station on Worcester Street. That is still a once upon a time gas station on Worcester Street, has been through so many kind of in front of us and died out. And I think the town sees that. I mean, it's glaring. Everybody who goes on Worcester Street, it hits them in the face and says, well, this is a dump. And I think that we need to be aware of projects that stall. And when they do stall, coming to the board and to the town with why it's stalled out and what's going on, and keeping the town informed.
Right.
That's just sort of a segue.
I've seen people commenting on it out on the internet and asking about it.
Right. Yeah. No, we're definitely cognizant of the sensitivities around that development and what's unfolded there. We do have myself and the town administrator have been continuing to speak with them. We do have a follow-up conversation with them scheduled. I can't definitively say anything about what
Oh, sure.
what will be said at that point, but we're continuing to make sure that we're both on the same, the developer and the town are on the same page, and obviously trying to make sure that this project continues on the path that it was originally planned. I mean, with 8 Pine, obviously how that's unfolded hasn't been ideal. However, having that 40R available to us for compliance is still a great asset and something that we can utilize. Because again, as
I
Dave
don't
was
want
saying,
it dying. I just don't want it sort of sitting there, spinning its wheels for the next 15, 20 years. When we approved that, I was on the board. Actually, this entire board, I think, was here. And we were all rather excited. This was going to be something that we saw as a positive thing for the town. Tufts was excited. They saw a possibility of housing for their students, which they're desperately short of. And, it was something that we were certainly very, very positive towards. So this isn't something that we really would like to see disappear. I think that seriously, it would be an asset to the town. So that's my segue.
Yeah, it'd be good to somehow let whatever can be said
Out there.
be said, so that people know
That we are thinking about it. It's not.
people know what's going on as much as they can, because they were going great guns out there, and all of a sudden everything stopped. And people have a right to wonder, particularly when we start talking about all of these different initiatives and whatnot that we're looking at.
Is there anything more?
How you do that, and it depends, but I think it's valuable too.
All right. Is there anything more we need to discuss regarding the transit village stuff tonight?
Yeah, one other point on the MBTA zoning. An attendee of this meeting asked on the Q&A, what happens if we do not pass the MBTA zoning by the end of 2024? The answer is Grafton becomes ineligible for several state grant programs. I think MassWorks or Mass Development, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. I think one of them is land acquisition, which we've used in the past for acquiring conservation land. So we become ineligible for those grants. Our local housing authority loses some funding. So there's.
And we're so close.
There's been some stuff in some of the papers recently that at least one CMRPC town is not going, is saying they're not going to adopt it. They don't want it.
Yep.
And the stories I've seen say, well, things are going on and they're going to be forced to, they got some things are going to change or morph or whatever. Somehow, they're going to tighten the screws.
But
right.
As it stands, if we don't have compliant zoning, we do lose several sources of funding.
But we're so close. It would be foolish not to. I mean, we're really not. It's not as big a stretch for us.
Yeah, but the question, what happens if we don't?
Yes. And yes, we do need to be cognizant of the consequences.
Yes.
Right. And then that's why we're trying, really to try and get this in front of town meeting early, as soon as we can in the event that we have to go back to town meeting again. So that's kind of been our strategy, getting ahead of the curve, especially since we are teed up right now with these 3 districts to be in an advantageous position.
Now, well, there's a chance for this year's fall town meeting, but I would say that next year's spring town meeting is probably the one to aim for, because then you have one more. Sure, of course you can always have a special, but that's not a good way to get zoning passed.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we also want to continue to have stakeholder interviews and discuss with folks in the community about their thoughts about the compliance and what Grafton can do to meet the compliance. right now we're in kind of, again, data analysis and testing, but we will need to have a public engagement process around this as well and gather feedback to kind of reinforce certain scenarios that we want to proceed with, and then go to town meeting from there. So that's kind of the next step once we can agree or, to hone in on some strategies.
Wouldn't surprise me if we end up wanting to have some public interaction for actually cutting the actual article, the actual action.
Right.
Not wait until after it's a warrant article and we're having our formal hearing.
Right. Yeah. The goal is to definitely do the engagement process, way ahead of time so that we can hear back from people, because it's, it is a big change. So.
Yep. Okay. The night is wearing on.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.
So we're done with that. Without objection from the board, I do want to bring up the zoning bylaw amendment proposal for Holden Farms next instead of the other town meeting articles. Since we have
good
10
idea.
days for that.
I can share my screen again, Dustin, if that's easier. Okay. Okay, so incorporating the comments from the last meeting, and since then I have gotten comments from the public regarding this. I came up with the following with some notes for consideration from the board, particularly regarding, underscoring that with a special permit, there will be an application process, so nothing is guaranteed just because it is going before town meeting or attempting to go before town meeting. That, nothing is going to, this doesn't absolutely guarantee that these types of uses are going to be happening. It's just opening. It's a tool that the folks can use to apply for a special permit, and then with the understanding that conditions that we discussed in the last meeting that we'll discuss today will be added to allow to give the board some discretion based on the kind of the history of the site and feedback that we've heard. So I did incorporate. I really kind of just took what we said at the last meeting here and really put it in the way in a way that I think was logical. I did have this checked with town council. Eve also took a look at it. Mr. Berger is also taking a look here. And I, in addition to changing the requirements that are in the use table that would potentially be number 15 here and some notes, I also considered the option of including a section 5.12 specifically for accessory uses in agricultural and residential districts with some requirements within, particularly in standards that reinforce that we must, the primary use must be an agricultural use. It must be a minimum of 20 acres. The accessory use cannot exceed 10% of the total agricultural acreage. And then in the review section, 5.12.3, we go on further to say that the special permit granting authority reserves the right to apply all of the conditions specified in the section 1.5 earlier in the bylaw, as well as ensuring that there's compatibility of the accessory use, mitigation measures that are taken to protect the neighborhood and neighbors, as well as ensuring that there won't be detrimental effects. So I kind of was looking at other zoning bylaws and communities that do have this type of use that's popular in the community. And that's where I got this text from. I also made a suggestion down here at the bottom to kind of evaluate if we can add some language to section 1.5 that I referenced earlier about having a condition when evaluating special permits that, I really like this first bullet. It was kind of short, sweet, and to the point, and really encompasses what we're trying to do here. The use will not have a detrimental effect which outweighs its benefits to the neighborhood, town, or the zoning district in which it's located. So these changes are relatively minor, and obviously I want to hear back from the board about your thoughts on how I can refine this language. But I think in terms of incorporating everything that we talked about in the last meeting, it should be all here, and was checked out by the appropriate parties.
I had two quick thoughts. One was that where you tie in 1.5, which is the whatever 12 or so, mostly is the 12 or so the board shall find, or the board shall make findings. Sometimes we have to be careful that someplace else in the bylaw there's something else that the board needs to find on, and so maybe when you say 1.5 and elsewhere in the law, just I think that's clear anyway, but it's a good idea, you know, since you started down that path. Yeah, let's do that. And the other thing is, I think this has to be, you know, we really want it to be, I'm sorry, one article. So the use table and all these conditions and so on are either it's up or down on all of it, because I think we need the extra stuff that you're adding besides just the words in the use table, use 15. Okay.
Yeah, but let me just add on to that. In the use table, the parenthetical expression regarding the noise level, it's probably better to not include that in the use table, but rather to include that as one of the conditions in the proposed section 5.12. As it is, I know what it's intended to mean when I see that in the use table, but it doesn't quite explicitly say it's talking about a noise level. You know, you could infer that by the use of the 10 dB above ambient noise, but I think probably it's a little bit easier if it's written out a little bit more fully in the new section 5.12.
Well, is there a difference between a described use when it comes to enforcement? We gave permission, and the law, what we gave permission for is a situation where it's not more than 10 dB, or where the use table requires that it not go above 10 dB. Then the zoning enforcement officer just has to go out and find out whether the use is what the bylaw allows. Down in the down below, that's a finding that the board has to make, that whatever's proposed to us will not exceed. And I'm not sure whether that's a permanent, whether that's as effective. Maybe it should be both places.
Okay.
Yeah, how about that? Let's put it in both places.
Yeah,
the use table requires it, and the board shall find that it is, that, you know, that what's being proposed does satisfy that, and that will let us, that'll give us a good handle on dealing with that.
Quick question. What's the deadline for submission?
Filing warrant articles soon.
For
March
warrant?
24th.
What is it?
March 24th.
March 24th.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So
We are tight.
we need to vote on this tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
I move that we submit this with the changes discussed tonight. Oh, well.
Second.
All right. I have a motion and a second. I do want to give the
Sure.
public a chance to talk before we make the actual vote.
Now you can have discussion of them.
Yes.
Well, do I get?
You want to start first since you both are up here, and then
So what is worded in here is what you guys are thinking and like down in the notes, is that something that you guys are gonna have control over, or is that just something like you're thinking about for after to add in there?
So I think
Where it's saying how the accessory use, for like the hours of the farm stand and that, it's just like,
yeah,
I don't like.
I'll
that
let Fiona
really.
tell me if I'm wrong on this answer. Is at least online it is in color. I see your printout is not in color, but it's
well.
basically that's okay. We have added text ingredient, deleted text is crossed out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what we be putting forward to town meeting. The notes she has that the board evaluate the bullet but the language will be adding that to 1.5.5 I believe is what the Mr. Hassinger's vote was to say, and then like the specific notes on the planner strongly recommending you seek out locations. That's more the recommendation for when it does come before the board after the town meeting vote. So that wouldn't be in the warrant article of town meeting.
Okay, so what I see in the accessory use up there is
Yeah.
pretty much.
And then the accessory use up there, and then below the section where the town planner strongly recommends, so that to see if the town will vote to amend the zoning bylaw, below that as well.
Right, yeah, if I may, the notes are just they are a suggestion for the board to consider at that, just as Justin said, at the time when you are coming before the board for your permit. It's something that I included there just to ensure that we cover all of our bases. That won't be explicitly going before town meeting, but just something that to consider based on all the conversations that we've had and feedback that I've received as the planner.
That's sort of a general thing about how 1.5.5 works, more or less, or things to enrich in 1.5.5.
Right.
And then my only other thing is 5.12.1 on the requirements.
Yes.
It says to retail stores selling agriculture, food, crafts, arts, and similar products. I just want to make sure that's not pertaining to like my farm stand where we're taking a whole vegetable, how it comes out of the field, and
Yeah, I would assume that the farm stand is considered an integral part of the agricultural use. So that would not be the accessory use that this is referring to.
okay.
That'll be my interpretation from reading this as well.
This accessory use, it can't be more than 10% of the agricultural use land.
Yeah, I think the existing statutes regarding agricultural use are pretty clear that the farm stand that you have there is simply considered part of the agriculture use.
Yeah.
It's not an accessory as this is referring to.
All right.
Be ready to move the question?
Not yet, Mr. Hessinger.
Peter Adams.
The thing is, we haven't had dinner, so
Well, you got to hold on a little bit longer.
Peter Adams, 100 Brigham Hill Road. I saw just part of this last week on the Grafton Channel, and I guess what bothers me most about it is you're limiting over 20 acres. Limiting it to properties of, you have to have at least 20 acres. Now, in my recollection, there's only, and forgive me if I'm missed a couple, but there's only 3 farms in Grafton that have over 20 acres. So it seems like it doesn't seem right to write a bylaw for 3 people. I mean, I kind of went over a lot of the streets. Paquette on Creeper Hill, he doesn't have 20 acres, and he's in the same business they are, I believe. Highland Acres on Old Westboro Road. My wife on Brigham Hill, Joe Perrell. I mean, he grows a lot of stuff in those greenhouses, and actually all the plants he brings in and sells, as long as he's watering them, That's agriculture. So in the zoning book, everything I see for agriculture says 5 acres or more. And the Department of Agriculture now allows a farm to be 2 acres or more. They have to make a certain amount, but, so I don't know whether, I know, I don't know if it was you, Dave, that said 20 acres and it's just a arbitrary number.
But
I don't like your arbitrary number.
It was
I don't
one
think-
of us, I know that.
That's why I came tonight. That and the percentage of land use, because you got somebody like Hillside Acres, if he wanted to do this, is it 10% that she put down or 20%? You know, you talk.
Yeah, we've got 10% in there at the moment.
He's got or Knowlton, a couple hundred acres. That's 10% is 20 acres for a beer garden. That's kind of big.
Yeah,
No, it doesn't have to be as
Maybe
big
you
as,
should go square footage on that instead of a percentage of the farm. But the to limit it over 20 acres, I'd rather talk about it tonight than on town meeting floor, because tonight's easier.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, we sort of, the principle was we figured, you probably want to limit to some somewhat larger operations, but what that number should be, I suppose if everybody was comfortable with it, we could simply eliminate the minimum acreage there and say, anything that qualifies as an agricultural use, which is basically 5 acres or more.
That's fine with me.
And if nobody has a problem with that, I don't think I would object.
I don't think you're going to get many takers on this bylaw.
No, probably not.
I don't think you will, but
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah,
where
and-
my wife is in it and I'm in it, it should be fair for everybody. And I don't think I'm going to set one up, so.
Yeah, and the 10%, the 10% came from the idea that this should be clearly an accessory to the agriculture operation, which means it's got to be some number less than half of it. But whether it's a percentage or a fixed number of acres or a combination, you could say 10% or 5 acres, whichever is lower. You could write it something like that if you wanted to.
'Cause, I mean-
I'm not married to any of these numbers.
Where
other than
they
the
have
general
their your show goats, that's part of, to myself, that's part of your,
Agricultural
the
operation
agricultural,
Yeah, 'cause it's
that's just entertainment for people coming by and
and
produce.
educational purposes.
But it is funny how agriculture has changed in Grafton.
Oh, yeah.
I grew up on a dairy farm, and it was all dairy, hogs, or chickens back then.
okay.
If you wanted a cucumber, you had to grow it in your backyard. You didn't go buy it someplace. But that's getting off the subject. And have you received recommendation one way or the other from the Grafton Agricultural Commission?
I can speak on that because I sit on the board. I've been trying to, I tried getting a meeting going and I reached out to the few members that were still on the board and
Can't hear very well.
oh, sorry about that. I had reached out to the few current members on the board, tried to see if we could set up something where we could meet. They said that they were going to do what they could and I hadn't heard anything back from them, so that's sort of where the road ended.
Yeah.
I think that is a good point.
Point,
because,
yeah.
I mean,
They
that-
could do a report at town meeting.
Yes.
It's-
Yeah, the support of the Agricultural Commission for this would, or let me put it, the Agricultural Commission's position on this, whether it's for or against, would carry a fair amount of weight, I think.
But getting back to the 20 acres, a lot of the little farmers in Grafton could use an extra sideline of income too. And I just don't think it's right to write a bylaw for 3 property owners.
Yeah, the thing though is that there seems to be quite a lot of people who want to help the current problem. And we really, how hard it is to get zoning through town meeting. So I think the thought here might be do this with as conservative a design as possible to reassure as many people as possible that they're not doing something that's going to be a big problem down the line. And then in the future, after this works out, maybe as a separate step, we could look at the more generous kind of thing that you're talking about. Perhaps if anybody comes along who really does want to do something like this.
Happens. You know that, and I know that.
Eve, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to mention that one of the reasons I think that we thought perhaps it would be better for a larger parcel is that it would be easier to mitigate the impacts on the surrounding neighbors because they wouldn't necessarily be quite so close on a larger parcel. When you talk about smaller parcels, it will be harder to mitigate the impacts. I think that was the idea. We also did look at the bylaw of the town of Natick, which has Lookout Farm, which has had just passed a similar bylaw not too recently, and they had it at 25 acres. So I don't know if there are other farms in Natick that were impacted, but I think the idea was that something of this nature would be better on a larger parcel to have less impact from the neighborhood, but it's up to the board.
Right. It could be that the size requirement is as much as anything related to the music, the
Sound.
the amplified sound. Well, the sound, particularly in zones that are have residential areas close to the source. It might be that you could have one acreage for when you do have sound, music, entertainment, and another for when you don't, and you can do the rest of these things like selling things. Because I don't think too many people are gonna want to have beer gardens with music on the farms that he's talking about.
Most of the problems that have been discussed can be handled during the special permit process, though.
Yep, I would agree.
During what?
You said most of the problems that could be, on those fronts could be addressed during the special permit process.
You're limiting who can apply. That's my complaint.
Yeah.
So I just heard Lookout Farm, but
Yep.
I mean, it should be clarified that Lookout Farm is totally different from our concept. I think they brew their own beer, which would fall under a totally different category of this. Hollis Hill Farm, Lilac Hedge in Rutland, Hollis Hills in Fitchburg. I kind of, do the same thing as them where it's a beer garden at the farm with other agricultural accessory uses. So that's that. And then, I did in the last meeting say, well, I want to look out for all the other farmers because let's face it, like agriculture is dying. And yes, if someone meets the requirements of 5 acres, they could have a real diversified operation, where, hey, on 4 of those acres, they have high density planting of X, Y, and Z. So it's like, I understand where he's coming from. That should be in the special permitting process. And why cut someone that may have a lot more to offer than we do to Grafton and the community and say, oh, well, you can't do it because you don't have 20 acres. So,
And just to reiterate, the acres of 20 was
right.
Our idea. You came to, I think, what, 5? I think you said.
5, yes. Which the Mass General Law requires you to have.
Yeah.
Come
on up.
This gets me back to a different concern, which is the proposed use table allows this by special permit in all zones. So you'd really like to have an analysis of, for whatever size you're talking about, what the impacts are, because, like, let's say I live in a half-acre zone and there's something real close to me that's proposing this, and I absolutely don't want it in my area, so I vote against it at town meeting. You gotta understand what the impacts are by starting here with a more or less large area. You reduce the number of prospects we have in all of our residential zones. We have large parcels that aren't developed that could come under this. We backed away from saying just agricultural because of that would require changing the zone for this property.
Jen Rich, like 88 Weston Street. Just a few questions and comments on the proposed amendment. I read the amendment to mean it will allow this or any kind of establishment under this accessory use the ability to operate a bar 7 days a week with the special permit. I'd like the board to consider limiting the numbers of days and the hours of operations and clarifying seasonal. That would be appreciated for the butters. The language on the proposed amendment related to the decibel levels is missing information. The at the property line is crossed out, and per the state noise regulations, the sound level cannot be more than 10 decibels above ambient noise at the property line. So I'd like that to go back into the amendment. 60 decibels in my backyard is not acceptable. 10 dBs at the property line, according to the state, is acceptable. Does the 10% of the total agricultural acreage allowed in the accessory use include parking?
I would defer to staff or Mr. Berger.
It would be part of the accessory use, so the answer was most likely yes.
Okay.
Well, is it separate parking from the parking for the agricultural use? Do they have to have enough area on their parking lot for the agricultural use, whatever that requirement is, I don't know. And a requirement somehow based on whatever the number of patrons or the space for patrons.
Well, they have parking for their farm stand, they have parking for their employees. So that's separate from the parking for the beer garden and the music.
The question was, what does the bylaw say? What does the proposed bylaw say?
The proposed bylaw says 10%.
Of the total acreage.
No, you're not
10%,
listening.
I am listening. 10% of the total acreage for agricultural. And that's going to be the accessory use. Part of that 10% is going to incorporate the beer garden, the stage where everybody stands, and the parking to support those two accessory uses. Separate from.
Is that clear in the proposal?
It's clear in my mind.
So our parking lot, our new big one we put in, we use for the farm stand also, and we did that to get people off of the main road because it is in a dangerous intersection. And by doing that, our only option was to go behind the current farm stand we're in right now. And that is a larger parking lot. But that, like I said, is used for the farm stand, the food trailer, the beer garden, which the beer garden where the music plays currently is on a 96 by 70 footprint that I have all fenced in with, so regardless, I'm not going over that 10% on 49 acres.
From my seat, and staff or Mr. Richard can tell me if I'm wrong on this, is the parking that is for the accessory use is considered in that 10%, and that's something that we can, if there is a parking lot that is in theory shared between the agriculture use and the accessory use, we can kind of figure out that split at our special permit process. Is that relatively fair?
Sure.
Okay.
What is the parking requirement for the farm stand? Bob?
It goes by the square footage. It goes by the square footage of the building.
Okay.
So where could we find that?
4.2
Zoning.
in the zoning bylaws.
In the town of Grafton bylaws. pertaining to farm stands, agricultural use?
The building. Farm stand's a business.
Right.
Okay, can I continue? Because
Yes.
it's about me right now. Who determines whether something like this would be detrimental to a neighborhood?
The planning board with input from the public during the special permit process.
Okay. It's a scenic road in an R40 zone. We're facing a decrease in our property value for ongoing noise disturbance. I face another summer fighting for my peaceful and tranquil life that I had before the bar opened. Last year, our family was criticized. Countless false accusations were made, as well as false police report. I suspect we'll face the same this year should we continue to fight for our home. So, is it not a detriment? Just to let the board aware of, that. The 5 acres that was talked about already. So the amendment is going to allow any farm with 20 plus, if that's the number that you decide on, to serve alcohol with town issued special permits. Is that correct? Is the town issuing the alcohol
We would
license?
issue a special permit for the accessory use of the area and their, accessory ability to basically have that there.
Okay.
The select board is the granting authority for the ability to serve alcohol.
Okay. And not the ABCC doesn't get involved. It's the town. It's the
the-
select board. I know they do the one day.
It's
I know
a
they
chain
do
of
the
event, yeah.
1 day permits things, which
It's a chain. The select
Yeah.
board is involved in actually granting the ability for them to serve alcohol. The ABCC oversees that entirely.
Yeah, it would be the same as any other pouring license.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're at the starting line and we're
Okay.
working towards the finish line.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that answers all my questions. I appreciate your time.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So before I call the vote, any further discussion from the board? Do we want to amend the article as we're going to submit it to town meeting in a different acreage level, or to make the at property line adjustment that was just suggested? Anything like that?
Yeah, I would recommend that the use table language regarding the decibel level be clarified along the lines we've already discussed at the property line, basically.
In the part down below, or in the use label?
I said use table. The noise level is phrase, the noise level clause in the use table. Well, I
Yeah,
earlier said maybe.
how
that
is it
doesn't
going to
need
be clarified?
I mean, right, the wording just needs to be a little bit more explicit. Noise level limited to no more than 10 dB above ambient noise levels at the property line.
We took out the state thing as the state standard.
No, that is
the
the state
state
standard.
standard is that we just had in the
No, we have language. The point is the state standard talks about how you make measurements, and I believe it speaks of at the property line. So if you're following the state process, you've got the property line process, as well as, I haven't read it in many years, but I'd hope that there's a little more about the science, the noise measurement science, than what we have.
Yeah, I think the intent here is to be consistent with state requirements. And if the language here needs to be tweaked in any way to make that, to clarify that.
Mr. Chair, we have the policy in town hall. There's a policy that EPA set, and Fiona may have it, but if she doesn't, I can forward it over to her to somehow incorporate it in this article.
Yeah, I think that's all, we're 2 or 3 comments here, basically, just aiming at
What's
the same
that
thing.
policy about?
Noise pollution. That's what the state calls it, noise pollution.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a whole. set of
I don't know how that
regulations.
works, or how it's applied. And why is it, how does it fit in with the situation we've had here? Bob?
Oh, I was waiting for somebody to ask. if the town of Grafton doesn't have a noise pollution regulation, then what we do is we have to take the EPA's, and we did. So we have their policy, we have the language, and that's what we enforced on the farm last season.
Which
Well,
I'm correct, we weren't over.
Did you enforce it or did it? Well, you,
I did an investigation. I said that at the last public hearing. Yes. And they were not over the 10 dBs. And there's a report out there. I can forward to the board.
that'll be interesting.
Could we get that report?
Just a question about whether, if we put this in with some number of acres, and then maybe at the public hearing or even at town meeting, someone decides that they want to amend that, maybe we decide that our recommendation would be to amend it. Will that fall within the scope of the article sufficiently to be allowed? In other words, do we have to figure this out now, or do we have the flexibility to make a change down the line? And without the moderator, I don't know whether, and without the specific motion, I don't know whether it's within the scope of the motion. But I would hope it would be.
I would
It makes sense for it
Yeah.
to consider it that way. But
my gut feeling is it would be within scope, but at the same time, I don't want to rely on that gut feeling. I would like us to have a proposal for town meeting that we are comfortable with as of tonight.
If I were the moderator, which I am not.
but you're
although I've
close.
come close at times serving as deputy, but I would say the specific numbers in here, that what the proposal on the table here is to have some threshold over which this would be allowed. And the exact number could be more, could be less on the floor than it is in the warrant article. It'd probably be, generally speaking, I would expect that to be considered within the scope. Same thing with the percentage.
I think I've moved to go ahead with what we already have, which is the 20. That someone might want to move to amend my motion, and then you can do that first.
So
I don't hear anybody.
As far as I'm concerned, we could submit this to the warrant, and ideally, what we submit to the warrant is exactly what we end up voting on town meeting floor, but sometimes circumstances change.
Yeah, well, we might decide at the public hearing.
Yes, as you said before, Bob, we might recommend that it be approved by town meeting with certain
With
changes.
an amendment.
So
So
Or
there's no
even-
way of getting that changed to 5.
We could,
or even
if we wanted to. Matter of
So we don't have
maybe-
the support to change it to 5, I guess is what I'm asking.
I would support it at 5. I'd also support it at 20. As for myself.
I wouldn't
in
have a
order to
problem
get
with
done before 10 o'clock, I move the question.
All right. So I have the motion and a second to submit this as drafted, which was the public hearing on the actual thing. The only modification is to the no more than 10 dB above ambient noise level at property line, and Bob and Fiona will touch base as well. They can bring it back up to us at our public hearing on this item if there is more to change for there. Do I have that accurate for the rest of the board? I don't hear an objection. All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman. See, he's still on the call.
He's eating Bob's supper.
You're
I don't know whether that's a yes or a no.
It's a yes.
A yes.
A visual.
I see a visual yes with a thumbs up. And
I
I
said
vote
aye.
aye.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Now we can
There
hear
we
you.
go.
Okay,
And
Is that
I
an
vote
aye, Braybo?
that's an aye.
Or was it a yes?
All right. I declare the motion carried unanimously. We will be submitting this warrant article as drafted for a town meeting. We will be holding a public hearing on all zoning article changes, so we will have that before town meeting. and at that point, you know, any member of the town come and make a suggestion, or and the board can make a recommendation as well. And then, as discussed at town meeting floor, it'll be discussed further, and there could be amendments made.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. No, I think that was likely to be our longest remaining agenda item for tonight.
Let's hope so.
Good night. Okay, and that brings us back up to the other proposed zoning bylaw changes for spring 2023 town meeting. We have section 4.2, which is our first on the list.
I can share my screen again.
Yeah.
Is Mike Colleen in the audience?
Let's see.
He
Yes.
is. Let's promote him to panelist.
Please do. All right, Fiona, you want to kick us off?
We're waiting for Mike.
He's joining right now. I see him.
Oh, good.
Let me know when you're ready for me.
I believe we're ready.
Okay, wonderful. So the proposed changes to 4.2, after a lot of discussion with a lot of different parties in town, we have decided, well, the town planner has, given the complexities that are unfolding with the MBTA community zoning, I thought that this really does warrant more discussion than the time that we have before this town meeting. I think that the changing of the parking requirements for the village mixed use district could significantly impact our MBTA community's compliance, and therefore I made the formal suggestion in my memo to continue to evaluate this and not pursue this for this town meeting. In regards to the other changes that were discussed for 4.2, I believe that, you know, I think that the discussion that we had last week was very productive, and I think we can move, my professional opinion is that we can move forward with those changes. However, I wanted to address this with the board this evening, as well as with Mr. Berger, about my concerns, and how, you know, open that up for discussion. I really, you know, with the analysis that we still have to do with our MBTA communities, I'm reluctant to make these changes because increasing the parking will have ripple effects on our density requirements and our compliance. And until we can iron that out and really nail down our scenarios, my recommendation is to hold off on the parking increase changes for now. And that's one of the will be probably the biggest point of contention this evening.
So, Mr. Chair, did everybody get a chance to read my memo? Not providing enough parking in a complex and obstructing the required fire lanes can have several ramifications. I gave that to the packet. I gave this a lot of thought. I'm advocating for the fire department. That's why I have the captain here tonight. We have village mixed use, and in the village mixed use, we have not permitted anything for 10 years except for 274 Providence Road. And that's why I brought this up 6 months ago, because 274 Providence Road opened my eyes that we have an issue with village mixed use with regards to parking. This is Grafton. This isn't Cambridge or Brookline, where we can park off the street. You can't have a 2 and 3 bedroom unit with 1.5 spaces. They're going to have no choice but to park in the fire lane. And when you park in the fire lane, that safety hazard, obstructing the fire lanes can put the residents and property at risk in case of fire or an emergency, as it prevents emergency vehicles from accessing that area. that can result in delay response in time for the firefighters, leading to property damage and loss of life. I'm advocating for public safety. And, you know, when I see something that I see that is just not working, my job as the zoning enforcement officer is to bring it to this board, because this is the board that can help make things right. Now, you know, with the MBTA, we have till 2024. And if we just keep on delaying doing something, now, maybe this might not be perfect with what we discussed last week, and maybe we could discuss something with a different number, but 1.5, it's just not working with the math with these smaller lots. We have a realtor in town that has his eye on a couple lots, and with these lots, he most likely is going to comply with Section 12, but it's not going to be the best thing for public safety. I mean, I gave you the memo, and you know, if you have 1.5 spaces, where are these people going to park on Sunday when everybody's home? And they're all, let's just say they're all 2 bedrooms, and they're all filled with a unit, a family unit, and they all have cars. Are we going to have fights in the parking lot, like putting chairs out in the south end? That this is my reserved parking space? I mean, I'm all up for a green community and try to save the planet, but we still need to provide adequate parking and a safe environment for these complexes. And I really would like something to happen on this spring meeting, because I don't want to see any more of these 274s slipping through. And then, God forbid, we have a problem and we can't do what we need to do.
I have a thought/question. If we do up the parking requirements at this Springtown meeting, when we develop a potential overlay district for the MBTA zoning, could we not include alternate parking requirements in the overlay district?
I can respond to that. So an overlay was a scenario that we examined, and it worked in one instance. Most of the time it did not work, and that was my hope, was that we were able to have an overlay that keeps the parking as it is, so that everyone can we can come to a compromise that works for everybody. However, it just running the analysis hasn't supported an overlay and a successful overlay. There was one instance where it did work, but I think that, again, you know, we still, based on our conversation from earlier, we still need to evaluate what path forward we're going to use for MBTA communities. And right now it's heavily contingent on the village mixed use as it is. So I am just trying to avoid a situation where, okay, we change the village mixed use to do this, and then we have to go back and change it all over again next year.
Yeah. Well, I think my question is more, if we choose to do an overlay district, my understanding is we are able to, in the overlay district, you know, regulations we set out, specify alternate parking requirements that the overlay district can have.
Yeah. We are, absolutely. The overlay district can have completely different rules from the base district. And keep in mind that the MBTA compliance table that shows the inability to comply with overlay district is based on a faulty assumption. So I have every reason to believe that an MBTA overlay district can work just as well as an MBTA base district. Arguably, in certain circumstances, that might even turn out to be better with some more flexibility. Yeah. But I would not make a decision tonight based upon the analysis that was presented to us earlier, because that analysis is based on faulty assumptions. So if we want to, so that gets back to the point that we have a lot of time. And yeah, if we let too much time elapse, we'll find ourselves up against a deadline. But right now, we have plenty of time to work the MBTA zoning and deal with however we need to ultimately decide we can best deal with parking there. That should not, at this point, preclude us from dealing with the village mixed use as it exists today, and you know, finding a way to address the parking issue.
Does the parking requirement require it to be surface parking, taking a portion of the acreage, or does it just say you have to have parking? Because buildings can have integral parking.
Yeah.
Which is another point on this.
If I remember correctly, the MBTA compliance model assumes surface parking.
Right, but that's
your actual implementation may not be 100% surface parking, whatever ultimately gets built there.
Yeah, the point is that we could go ahead with the parking restrictions, and people would still be able to build a building that complies by putting the parking below, no matter what CMRPC's analytical scheme is.
Yeah, and again, remember the MBTA zoning says nothing about actual building. The MBTA zoning is strictly what the zoning, under a certain set of assumptions, what the zoning would permit. And in fact, the MBTA compliance model, I don't recall off the top of my head whether you could tweak that or enter parameters appropriately to account for structured parking. That sort of, again, all the worries about MBTA, we don't need to let those prevent us from doing something right now.
Right. I suspect the chief has something to say, and I'll bet that it's somewhat like what Bob's saying.
And it's the captain.
Captain, go ahead.
Captain, whatever.
No, he's the captain.
I don't know.
It's all the same. It's fine. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, sure. I'll speak my part if you're okay with that. I'll preface this to all the people who emailed me today. I didn't get back to them. I apologize. I was a bit busy, but I will email you back. Thank you all for allowing me to speak tonight. So yes, the fire department's view is that we do agree with Mr. Berger's opinion on more parking spaces, specifically for visitor parking, for projects such as 274 Providence Road and other projects that have come across the desk where there's no sort of visitor parking, and we're just afraid that, you know, upon the circumstance of Sundays, graduations, celebrations, etc., that vehicles could be in our way if there is an emergency. So I wrote a little something, and please feel free to interrupt, ask questions. I figured this will give you at least a little view from what we see from the fire side and why this is so important. But basically, the Grafton Fire Department's mission is to protect life and property. We can only do this by ensuring that the department's members, as well as mutual aid partners, are able to operate easily and effectively. The requirements currently listed in the bylaw, along with the minimum requirements the fire department proposes to all developers, is based on the Massachusetts codes and regulations. These codes typically arise from problems found during tragedies that occurred in the past. The fire department enforces these rules to uphold this mission to prevent life and property loss. So I'm sure we can all think of why parking in the fire lane could be bad. If a vehicle is parked in front of the fire hydrant, we would have to either go around the vehicle or we have to go through it. And if you've seen videos where they break the windows, that's unnecessary damage to people's vehicles. If a vehicle is blocking the fire department connection, that's our supply to the sprinkler system in that building. So we have to hook up a hose to provide water to the building so that the sprinkler maintains through there and that fire doesn't just keep spreading because the sprinkler goes out. So that could be a huge detriment as well. A vehicle is blocking a fire apparatus. The longer amount of hose that we need to lay delays the time for us to try to rescue victims and extinguish fire. Vehicles that are too close to a building are also prone to become part of the fire because of radiant heat transfer. So I figured I kind of sum up what we look at in like a scenario, like what happens when there's actually a fire, right? So the alarm comes in, the chief arrives, and he or she needs to park somewhere. So that's already a parking spot that they need to take up, and they need to be able to see the whole view of the building. They need to be able to communicate, they need to be able to stay out of the weather, and they have to keep that view in order to maintain integrity and make sure everybody is safe on the fire ground. They go and they do a 360, they look for is there propane tanks and power lines and utilities, and these all affect the incoming apparatus and the ability for us to access the building. If we find a fire hydrant that is blocked, again, we either have to go through the car, around the car, or find another hydrant, which in town they're typically spaced 500 feet apart, meaning that somebody has to take the large diameter hose we have, which is 5 inches, that weighs 100 pounds every 10 feet, and what they call hand jack, or take that and walk it back to another fire hydrant to hook it up, and then hook it up to the engine to supply water. That engine now has to be able to access one of the doors. I know we all think about going through the front door, but we might have to go around to the rear. And my point of that is it takes more hose. On the apparatus, we have what they call crosslays, which is hose that's pre-connected to the truck, in which you would flake the hose out and you could charge that line. So there's water in it, but it's only a certain amount of feet. So if we have to go more than that amount of feet, so say it's 250 feet, if we have to go 350, we have to disconnect the nozzle and add more hose to it. With that being said, if it's already charged, we have to shut that hose down and add to it, and that's even more time. The biggest problem with all of this stuff, and I'll continue about just so I can kind of explain how much space is taken up and why it's so important that we have this road minimum and these vehicles off the road and out of the fire lane, is that legacy furniture back in the day didn't burn fast. It burned slow. We could get to the building within 20 minutes and we could still put the fire out, and it could be contained possibly to the room or to a second room with extension. Nowadays, with modern furniture and the way they build it with all the oil and the flammable chemicals inside, and the use of industrial lumber, things burn hotter, faster, and much quicker. There's a whole bunch of studies from Underwriters Laboratory, which studies all of this stuff, that basically says there's a huge potential for collapse of the building prior to the fire department arriving because of the use of these lightweight materials. So even though construction is quicker and more affordable and easier, it's more dangerous for us and the people who are inside. So again, with the explanation of how heavy that hose is, that same hose that I talked about being 100 pounds light is 1,000 pounds when it's charged, and no one can move that. That connects to the side of the truck. So if you think about a fire engine, there's a port on the side, and that connects to the side. So you have a 5-inch hose, which comes out the side, probably anywhere from 4 to 8 feet, and wraps around, and it's 1,000 pounds. So once that's charged, you can't move it. We don't allow cars to drive over it. We can't get apparatus to go over it or around it if we don't have enough room. And that's one of the biggest reasons right there. Off the other side of the apparatus is hose that we bring in the building. It's smaller hose, but again, to deploy that, you need anywhere from 5 feet to another 10 feet. So we talk about minimum road width and requirements that I send out to all the developers about being 24 feet with the hope that they'll do 28 feet. It's because if the width of the fire engine or the apparatus that's on scene is 8 feet, and you have to have 5 feet off the left side for the big hose and 5 feet off the right side for the small hose, that's already 18 feet right there. Never mind another piece of apparatus that needs to come by, or another chief's car, or whatever it is. That same apparatus has hose sometimes in the front. So you have to think of that as well. So if there's a car that's parked there, we actually have a bumper line. So hose can come off the front, and then ladders come out of the back. And we have ladders that are anywhere from 10 feet to 35 feet. So we have to leave room for that apparatus to take that ladder out. So if you're pulling up and another engine has to come in the back, they have to leave a good 15 to 20 feet for us to get a ladder out, which leaves them less room and less length of hose to actually reach the fire. So a certain engine can only pump a certain amount of water, and it can only pump a certain amount of lines. So you have to have a second apparatus sometimes to pump as well. And if they're 500 feet from the fire, they're not going to make it with the amount of hose. As I said, things burn hotter and faster. Time is of the essence. all the compartments on the apparatus itself, they open either upwards or they open outwards. So that's another good 1.5 feet, 2 feet of space we need to open those compartments, which contain valuable things such as, the jaws of life, shorter hose, stuff, extra nozzles and so forth, but stuff that could be essential. When the aerial truck arrives, which is the one that we have that's a tower and has a bucket at the end, that has about 100 feet of reach to the building. We don't really use that, for vertical reach. We use it more for horizontal reach. We want to get that to the building so if somebody's hanging out, we can grab them really quick. Basically, what happens when we arrive with that is that it has what's called outriggers or stabilizers on the outside. When those come out, they ensure that the aerial ladder that swings one way or the other to the left or the right of the truck isn't going to make the truck tip over. Those stabilizers, when they're out, require that width of that truck to be 16 feet wide. And if we're forced to go onto the grass, or there's a vehicle in the way, or there's a manhole, well, the stabilizers sink into the grass if it's wet or not frozen. They can go through a manhole, which is extremely dangerous, and they can't be brought out if there are cars on that side. So that's an extremely important part if we have to get the aerial up for either rescue or for ventilation. We can use ground ladders, but again, we have to have that certain height and that angle. So we throw ground ladders for a bunch of different reasons, for rescue, for firefighting, for egress, and they're all at different degree angles. So if we have to angle that ladder at a 45-degree angle rather than a 75-degree angle, we won't be able to do that if there's a car in the way, essentially. And the other part of that is we always watch out for wires. So if that apparatus is forced to move a certain way and it can't get 10 feet away from those primary power lines, those people who are climbing up are in extreme danger. And again, this all happens in seconds of us thinking of all of this stuff. And to try to get around this, if there isn't enough room for us to work, it's extremely complicated. It makes our job much harder. The fire can extend much faster, and we might not be able to reach those victims in time. If there's no hydrants, we can talk about that as well. There's parts of towns where there is no hydrants. There's dry hydrants where we have to attach a piece of hard suction, which is not like the flexible hose you see. It's rigid, and there's no way to get around that. And that might be in 10-foot sections. So that's another 10 feet right there. The other thing that we might call in is for other towns to bring us water in tankers. And those tankers carry, like, for instance, 3,000 gallons, and they show up and they put it in a portable water tank that we have. And typically that water tank's about 7 feet by 7 feet, and it can't move because it has those gallons of water in it. So you can't push that one way or another. And again, you're going to have apparatus come on either side if you possibly can, or they're going to have to find another way to get to that scene, which could be going around the block, could be going all the way a mile down and going around another side street. It depends on the situation. If there's the last part of that, basically no hydrant situation, is if we have to set up a tanker shuttle, which takes much more than the 24-foot minimum width. But we can make it happen if we have that. Because what happens basically is we have that portable tank, a neighboring town comes in, they empty their water out into that tank so we can use it to fight the fire. Then they take off to go to a certain staged area where they fill up again and they come back. And that only works if you can go in the one direction and keep going out. So that way it's a one-way flow and nobody gets stuck.
So, Captain, let me just jump in for 1 second.
Sure.
So you can see that, this is why I'm advocating for fire, is because I don't know their job, but I've been on their sites. And when they're fighting a structure fire, they're just an army doing and listening to the captain or the chief, and they're amazing. But I just want to give them every opportunity and every chance they can get to protect themselves and protect the public. So that's why I'm advocating so hard for this spring meeting. And I don't think that we're asking for too much. I think we're asking for what we need.
Yeah, that's I'd like the captain to comment on the numbers that are picked here. Do you think that those are the the appropriate numbers for us to be proposing, and they'll provide the safety that you need.
And before you answer that, Mike, before you answer that, Lordville and Forest Hills, that I know you've been there plenty of times, and those numbers are the numbers that were used when they constructed Lordville. So if you look at Lordville, or you look at Forest Hills, not Lordville, their driveway is a little bit bigger, but if you look at Forest Hills, that complex is situated with the 2.25 per unit. So you can see they have one in the driveway, and there's several visitors parking with pods of 4 or 5. I just want you to visualize that before you answer, Bob.
Yeah, no, and I was going to say that I probably have to sit down and do the math, but using that as a reference, yes, I agree. Those are sufficient numbers right there. Every time I've been up to that development, just for instance, we haven't had a problem turning around, having access. It's worked very well. Again, it's all about life safety and property conservation with us. We just want to make sure that we're able to do our job as soon as possible. And if we look at the other side of it, it would be to help the EMTs and medics in town. The ambulance needs to get as close as it possibly can. And if they're at a fire, for instance, and there's somebody that they need to get to, they have to move their stretcher over 5-inch hose and past vehicles. They might not be able to get there as efficiently as they can. And if they put that injured person onto like a board to move, they could fall over the place. They could get more injured. There's a lot of negatives. And I understand the board's opinion on both sides, but from a life safety standpoint, it's very important that we're able to access every building as much as we can, from every angle that we can.
Yeah, so if I may try to bring this sort of, bring it around to the what I think the primary question here is what if anything can we or should we plan on doing for the Maytown meeting? And as I recall, when we've discussed this in the past, the discussion seemed to be going in the direction of in-village mixed use. If a particular project has access to off-street shared parking, not on their own premises, to accommodate the necessary parking, they can provide a reduced amount of parking because of the access to parking off the property. Where they don't have access to other parking, as in the case of 274, then the idea would be that it's a multifamily unit, multifamily development. If you have no other available parking, then you need to provide 2.25 spaces per unit, or some other number if we choose.
Right, exactly.
And that's and I thought at one time we were kind of working toward that, and the discussion seems to have shifted away from that. But as I said earlier, the MBTA considerations, we can put those off for right now. We can talk about plain vanilla VMU, and sometime later we can talk about how we leverage that, and possibly with modifications for MBTA zoning. But I want to try to avoid throwing too many things in the mix all at once. If we have something here that we can do in a relatively straightforward manner to deal with the immediate issue at hand, and we can be convinced that it's not going to make life more difficult when we get around to the MBTA zoning. Because for one thing, we're talking about here a requirement for all of VMU. When we look at MBTA zoning, when we're looking at leveraging VMU for the MBTA zoning, we're only looking at 1.5 of our existing VMU zones.
But you, on the last meeting, and I agreed with you on the last meeting, you want to go to 12.7 or 6, Fiona, you know the number, and delete that entire section and refer them to 4.2. Yeah. So we don't have a duplication.
Right. So the idea, as I recall, was that in section 12 for the VMU for parking, we would basically refer to 4.2.2 if you don't have any off-site parking that you can leverage.
And I thought the off-site parking that you can leverage was a special permit through the planning board. So they have to go in front of the planning board to say, look, we don't have the parking here, but we have parking across the street.
Right. So I would, as I recall, we're working, we have a March 24th deadline for putting things on the warrant.
We do.
One of the things that we can do and have done in the past is put sort of a placeholder on the warrant. That is, we reserve a spot on the warrant. We might have a draft of the warrant article, but in this case here, we are not, seeing as how it's approaching 10 o'clock tonight, we are not about to nail down the language that we would need for that. And what I recall, I haven't been looking at this that closely up to this point, but if we want to make this happen, I will participate in it. I will look at what we've previously proposed. I'll think about it, and anybody else can too. It's not just, I'm not the only one who can do this.
I think you are.
I will put in whatever time,
Bob's raising his hand.
We have
Yeah, been
Bob's
trying.
his hand for a while, and then Eve.
Thank you.
Someone just said something. Public safety is preeminent. I hear testimony from the zoning officer, the fire captain. I'm convinced that we have to have parking requirements along the lines of what's been proposed here. No matter what you're trying to jam into any given land because of something like the MBTA requirement, I think that we have to deal with the safety. And then, as we said, we can look at solutions to how to comply with the MBTA requirements between now and the fall town meeting of next year. And I want us to, I don't see a placeholder very well because there isn't much time for advertising. If you make a placeholder, I'm not sure how you have a public hearing. I think you have to have the language that you're going to put on the warrant before you can advertise a hearing. So I don't think there's really much time. And I say, go with what's proposed here now.
Eve, go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to try to stay out of this discussion, but I thank the captain and Mr. Berger for their comments. But I worked in a different community a while back where they were having a similar issue where there was a development that wasn't working exactly the way that everyone had thought it was supposed to. And what they did, instead of picking a number or changing the bylaw in any particular way, right away, they put a moratorium, a short, maybe 6-month moratorium on and using this kind of building that kind of a particular kind of development or in a particular zone, maybe, with the idea that they would do a study within those 6 months and come up with an actual number or whatever, solve their solution by the end of the 6 months and then come forward with that. And I wonder whether or not, in conversations with Mr. Berger and with Fiona today, I think the issue is that the concern is that if it's left the way it is now, we'll get more of the problem childs that we're dealing with right now on Providence Road. But we don't have a particular project right now to look at. So if you put a moratorium and don't allow them until you kind of look further into what might work for both perhaps the MBTA and for the issue that we're having at this particular property, then you might come up with a solution that will work in all ways without having to change it one way now and then maybe have to change it back or to something else later. And you just talk so that you don't end up getting any more problem children between now and the time maybe at fall town meeting where you've had some more time to look at what the right number is. It's just a suggestion that this other community used, and that way it's not really a placeholder, it's more a moratorium, and this is why, and then people can actually comment on that particular issue.
I think maybe Linda has a motion to make.
Yeah, I move that we vote to run the meeting past 10 o'clock.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. We can now not turn to pumpkins.
I don't want to get into a moratorium. I want to put this in place.
Fiona, did you have something beyond the 10 p.m.? Okay.
Nope.
All right. Yeah, I think I'm with the rest of the board on this. I don't like the idea of telling developers that we have this bylaw, but you can't use it for 6 months. That just doesn't feel, the best use of ours or their time. I think trying to address the parking now, especially with the comments from Captain Killian, that is something that we should definitely try to pursue. I think I will say, I don't know if we have enough that we can make a vote tonight. I also don't feel that thrilled about the idea of a placeholder for this particular warrant. I'd be open to holding a special planning board meeting next week, Zoom only if we want, that we can just go over this one item.
I think we're good enough. And if I didn't make a motion before, I'll make a motion now to go with what we have.
And what is it that we have?
The proposal. What's over here in our materials.
That's it?
That's it. A studio apartment. I really can't see that far, but I think it says studio and 1 bedroom, 1.25. 2 bedroom and 3 bedrooms, 2.25. And just for informational purposes, 2.25 has been working since May 12th, 1986. So it has been working since May 12th, 1986. I don't know.
Now, what about the current language in section 12 that addresses parking?
Well, the first.
Don't we have to reconcile that with this?
Well, but the first draft that Fiona had, that she might have in her computer, deleted that section and referred it to here. And that's what we all talked about that last meeting. And then all of a sudden, all of this changed. So, Fiona, do you have the?
I have the original proposal that.
Can we see it for a second?
Yes, let me.
Because I think that addresses.
Because that's the other part of this.
But I think that was addressed, and I think it's an addressed. I think it. What I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Yep. 1 second.
Is that good enough?
If you're asking my opinion, I'm saying yes.
I'm asking that partly of myself. Do I think that's good enough? Am I comfortable with that?
Well, I think that you gave us that idea of you don't want duplication, so we got rid of it there and threw it over here, and I agreed with that.
In the context.
I'm just.
They're talking
Fine.
behind Fiona's back.
1 second, sorry. I have it from the prior meeting. 12.
What?
See, they're talking behind her back.
Should be ours. No.
And how much snow do you think we're gonna get?
Well, enough that Grafton School's closed.
Oh,
yeah.
And Worcester and Millbury.
How did they close school with no snow on the ground yet?
we're very smart. Well, Newton.
Until it doesn't snow.
Yeah, well, they don't care. Did Newton close?
I don't know. My kids are out of it, so I don't pay attention anymore.
So the original proposal, that version I can't, but essentially what we would have is we would take,
There you go.
oh, sorry, can you see my screen?
We can.
We would be putting this back, taking this out from here, taking out the reference to the shared parking and referencing 4.2.5.3, which says the exact same thing that was in the red. So streamlining it and then bringing it, essentially taking the what was crossed out originally. Apologies for bopping around here. I'm just going to make the changes in real time here. Keeping this there. Can you see my screen okay? Do you see what I just did?
We can.
No, I can see your screen. I can't tell what you're doing.
Okay, so I just took what was struck out for the multifamily dwellings in the village mixed use, made them green, so incorporating them into section 4.2.2, and then referencing the in 12.7, getting rid of the text that talks about the shared parking and referencing the other section of the bylaw that talks about that. And also, instead of having it's in 12.7, having its own section that talks about parking requirements specifically for VMU.
Your screen
Referring the reader to 4.2. So having everything in 4.2 and kind of getting rid of the last two sections of 12.7.
Just to say,
So it's really just relocating the reader elsewhere.
Your screen right now is just showing Grafton zoning bylaw section 12.7.6 proposed changes March 7th, 2023. That's all we see.
Okay, 1 second. So this, I don't have because when I was preparing the materials, I didn't combine them, but I can can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay, so
that was the one.
The proposal is moving this here and referencing for 12.7, telling the reader to look to in the separate section for shared parking and taking out the text for the shared parking and taking out the parking requirements in 12.7 and putting everybody referencing the reader to 4.2. So it's a really easy lift.
Yep.
Okay.
So
I'll bring it back to that.
I want to know if Bob thinks that's the right thing for us to move forward with.
I do.
Okay. I'd like to adjust my motion to reference this version of the wording. And whoever seconded.
Second.
And for clarity, that motion includes in the 12.7 language in the same warrant article.
It includes what Bob just says is what we need.
Okay, then yes.
It's gotten beyond me.
Understood.
Not sure I'm totally comfortable, but it's good enough for now.
All right. So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins.
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger.
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the motion carried unanimously. This is what we'll put forward as well.
I'd like to say thank you to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm not going to suggest we go with this right now, but something I saw the other day reminded me that there are a couple of tweaks that need to be made to the marijuana section of the zoning bylaw. The changes we made back in October, the Attorney General's review pointed out two minor defects in the language we proposed, where the intent was to align the language with state regs, and it missed on a couple of points.
Oh.
But we can deal with that in the fall.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Let's bring that up after May town meeting.
I just don't want to forget
I
that.
don't want to interrupt. I just want to say thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain.
Thank you, Captain.
Okie dokie.
So.
Yes.
So the next one was 12.7.6 on our agenda, which we just rolled into the 4.2. So Does that close out the proposed zoning bylaw changes for Springtown meeting? Okay.
Yes.
All right. That brings us down to bills.
Move we approve the bills.
Second.
Disapprove the bill.
I have a motion and a second to approve the bills. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger?
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger?
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman?
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare the bills will be paid. Staff report.
Keep it short and sweet because it's late. I am applying for another DLTA application through CMRPC to get a review of 5.1-A of our open space and recreation plan, which would ultimately involve an initial desktop analysis and develop a priority list of parcels for acquisition of land to expand and connect resources. This is something that's been brought up by the board, as well as it's in the plan, of course, and other members of the public have discussed this with me. So I think that it makes sense to try and get something together with CMRPC through this, through DLTA, which is obviously a free program for us to participate in. We did submit our application by the March 9th deadline, and we are scheduled to appear before the Physical Development Committee on the 16th. So that was in my memo. In addition to that, I am doing many other things. It's very busy right now in the planning department, I will say, between our housing production plan, grant applications, working with VHB on MS4 requirements, our zoning changes, which you discussed, our Institute Woods study that we are working with the community, the CPC on finalizing for that upcoming meeting on the 23rd, which Justin is aware of, as well as our master plan. We were scheduled to have our town tour tomorrow, but obviously that fell through due to the weather. So we are rescheduling for next Tuesday. And we have our list of stakeholders prepped and ready to go. The survey is launched. And the next steps from there will be reaching out. CMRPC will be reaching out to the stakeholder list I provided to schedule some interviews. So that's the really short and sweet version of what's going on, but I'm sure I'm missing a ton of things as well. So yeah, if anyone needs anything or wants me to focus or prioritize a particular project, just let me know. Right now, there's about 20 different balls in the air, so.
Gotta get good at juggling.
That's the good news, isn't it? You said something about being excited or interested in all the planning and all that stuff that we're doing when you came here.
Yeah, I remember.
You got enough planning going on here?
Yeah, Grafton is doing a lot of great things. It's a very exciting place to be a planner right now. So
Good.
All good.
All good. Let's see. Are we moving on to correspondence? There's a very interesting.
There's no meeting minutes, so yes, we're moving on to correspondence.
Very interesting document. I don't think it requires us to do anything, but it is more or less the information that I and I think others were looking for back during the warehouse hearings.
I think that's a
little hard to parse out exactly where everything is, but it pretty well demonstrates
light reading
what's been discussed.
Yeah, light reading indeed.
a notice required by state law, from my understanding.
Lays it out and shows who's in charge of worrying about, and that they are worrying about the situation. They have control over anything that's done there. So anything that's done will have to satisfy those folks.
Any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC that want to be discussed tonight? I see none.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn, not debatable. Mr. Robbins?
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger?
Aye.
Ms. Hassinger?
Aye.
Mr. Venkatraman.
Aye.
And I vote aye. I declare us adjourned.
And
Have
it's not even